pretty sure the people who hustled on AI helped grow our economy. I'm sure the investments that we made at agencies across our federal government helped us meet the challenges that we are facing in innovation and competition from China. Not that dividend, but now we're doubling up again. And how much is that multinational tax break? To over $200 billion. So literally, you could take half of that money and you could give it to Medicaid instead and not cut Medicaid. Now let's see. Tax breaks to Meta and Google or paying for Medicaid. Tax breaks for Facebook and Meta, the same company now changing their name, and Google, or a tax making sure there's enough revenue to pay for Medicaid. This is ludicrous. The notion that we are continuing to make big corporations the priority when they knew this tax extension was not coming. And I'm pretty sure if you look at the numbers that you see from Facebook, Meta, and Google, you will see they don't really need a tax break. They're doing pretty well right now. So the budget reconciliation bill really threatens our progress on healthcare. Now let me explain what I mean by that. It's not enough to just say that this healthcare issue that we are really winning the day. When you look at what happened to us in healthcare, when our whole goal of doing the Affordable Care Act was to basically get more people covered under insurance. Why? Because we wanted to lower all the costs on healthcare overall. We wanted healthcare costs to go down, and we wanted the cost of premiums and the cost to individuals to go down and to be more like the rate of inflation, 3 to 4%. That has been our goal forever. And so prior to the Affordable Care Act, it rates on an annual basis. Think about this, on an annual basis, your healthcare premiums, your healthcare costs were generally rising about 5.4% a year. Okay, who could keep up with that? Who could keep up with every year your healthcare costs continuing to rise? And so we did the Affordable Care Act, and guess what? We did get that into the rate of inflation. I think there's more we could have done. Lots of things happened in between, but we literally got it down to 3.7%. And we did that by covering more people. The audacity of my colleagues over here to now claim that Medicaid expenses got too expensive, when in reality, we made this choice to drive down these premium costs so they were only rising close to inflation, and that was our goal, and we succeeded. So what are we doing now? Well, under the GOP plan, Wakely Healthcare Institute and the Center for Budget Policy, these are numbers that come from them. The GOP plan will now go back to raising your premiums and your healthcare costs between 7 and 11% a year. So we're going to go blowing way past the 5.4. We're going to go back here. And why? Because you're going to cut off millions of people from healthcare. You're going to increase the cost of uncompensated care. You're going to make people wait to go to emergency rooms, and then they're going to be sicker, and that's going to cost, I don't know how much it costs, but it's definitely a multiple of 5 or more. I don't know if it's, what do you think it is, Kevin, at emergency room? 10. Okay, 10. He says 10. It's 10 times more expensive to deal with somebody at an emergency room than just get health insurance and get covered. Okay, so now we want to know, why are we raising the cost on everybody's health insurance, including these plans? Because this side of the aisle basically wants to cut a bunch of people out of a system that lowered the cost of healthcare plans overall and kept it more in the rate of inflation. Why? Why would you want to do this? So it makes no sense, and I hope our colleagues will think long and hard about that. I also think that you could still take the Google Meta tax break for multinationals and pay for $100,000 and cover the Medicaid. You could take another $100,000 from that big tax break, and you could pay for some of the energy tax credits that were so essential to combating the Chinese in what they are doing on the clean energy front. The Chinese firms are doing everything they can to invest and undercut the United States in EV and battery technology. The U.S. is responding aggressively to that. That's why we did the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, the Inflation Reduction Act, we basically enacted more than 2,000 new clean energy industrial manufacturing jobs, more than 980 private sector jobs, and more than 3.4 million Americans claimed clean energy tax credits that improve their efficiencies. In fact, the Joint Economic Committee estimated that the typical household could save between $460 and $1,000 in annual energy costs, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. But what do we have now? We have President Trump and inflation. We have inflation because of multiple issues, consumers struggling to keep up amid higher prices, mounting debt, and fiscal uncertainty. That's what we have. And so we're reversing the very tax credits that help lower the cost, and we're going to help us be competitive against China and help us succeed as a nation in the one thing that I always think the United States is really great at, and that is innovation. I don't know if it just started with Ben Franklin or many other people along the way, but you give Americans the task and they will do the job. If you give them the education, if you give them the R&D with a university partner, they will get the job done. And so now, don't take my word for it, take Mr. Musk's word for it. The latest Senate draft bill destroys millions of jobs in America and causes immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane, destructive. It gives handouts to the industries of the past while severely damaging the industries of the future. Yeah, he said it best. But back to that chart, we were doing the energy because we wanted to diversify, but we also wanted to lower costs and we wanted to be competitive. Right here it says the vehicle. Okay, natural gas, propane. Okay, that's why we were diversifying, because all those things are going up. So, and this bill is not going to help electricity. You're getting rid of the electricity tax credit. So again, instead of helping Meta and helping Google, you could be helping to lower the inflationary cost by making the investments in these tax credits. But Mr. President, there's more in this bill that I don't like. My colleague from Texas is proposing an AI moratorium. He literally wants to stop states from regulating the rollout of autonomous vehicles, like Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who signed a letter last week to regulate how autonomous vehicles are licensed and deployed in Texas. And how do proponents of this moratorium propose to get started? By holding broadband money hostage unless you implement an AI moratorium. Well, I know what the Heritage Foundation said. The Heritage Foundation said that federal AI power grab could end state protection for kids and workers. Again, you are giving states a big, fat bill, and now you're trying to override laws that have been on the books for a long time, protecting consumers from fraud, from abuse, and from protecting, they are there to protect kids, and now you want to get rid of them. So it's no surprise that stakeholders on the right and left oppose this in the bill. They include 17 Republican governors and 40 attorney generals from both Democrats and Republicans, and other organizations ranging from the Heritage Foundation to the Center of American Progress. So anytime you can get the Center for American Progress and the Heritage Foundation on the same side of an issue, chances are you should be listening to what they have to say. But Mr. President, this letter, I would like to enter into the record from the National Association of Attorney Generals.
Without objection.
This bill would affect hundreds, I'm quoting now from this letter, quote, this bill would affect hundreds of existing and pending state laws passed and considered by both Republican and Democratic state legislatures. Some existing laws have been on the books for many years, end quote. Okay, so these are attorney generals from a variety of states who basically know the laws on their books, and they're basically saying, don't do this to us. Don't override our laws. So I'd also like to enter into the record, Mr. President, a letter from 17 Republican governors also against this provision.
Without objection.
Their letter, I'd like to read from, is really about this point I was trying to make about fighting China. I mean, I thought we were here to be competitive against them, to basically beat them in a race on innovation, just like we did with chips and science to try to move for the future. But basically their letter says, quote, we fully recognize that AI is dominant in the next industrial competition between the United States and adversaries like Communist China. States have led anti-Communist China action, banning Chinese affiliated companies from owning farmland and property critical for infrastructure and military bases. But America should not sacrifice the health and safety and prosperity of its people in this fight. We must curb AI's worst excesses while also encouraging growth, which is exactly what states have done through their creation of their own regulatory framework, end quote. So they're basically saying the states are on the front lines of helping to protect on AI. Now, Mr. President, I have no idea why the President of the United States has not protected the American people or the American military from the Chinese scams that are happening on TikTok. You know, we would never let China own ABC News and put out Chinese communist propaganda on ABC News, but we let them do that on TikTok. This body and our colleagues said, no, stop that and stop the Chinese. And yet we still haven't stopped the Chinese. So now here we are in this bill cutting out the state's abilities to fight Chinese AI companies like DeepSeek or Alibaba and they have no interest in stopping the scammers from using their AI products to harm Americans. They have none. And if you think we're going to pass something here, I'm always ready to sign up to get legislation done. But that isn't going to happen anytime soon. And so now you're telling these governors, these attorney generals, yep, I'm not even going to let you fight China because I'm going to take that tool away from you. So clearly, I don't support this part of the legislation, and I appreciate my colleague from Tennessee and her attorney general working on this very important issue. And finally, I come to the issue of spectrum. This is a very ill-conceived plan to auction off our precious spectrum. Such an auction will fundamentally compromise our defense capabilities while endangering aviation and important federal capabilities like weather forecasting and scientific research. This bill would require the FAA would require an auction of 800 megahertz of spectrum critical to our military and civilian infrastructure. It would compromise military radio frequencies and weather and other spectrum issues. Most importantly, drone operations. And I know the presiding officer knows how much drones are now at the epicenter and forefront of warfare and is reshaping the battlefields across the globe. So why would we do this? Well, my colleague, Senator Cruz, is pushing for something that experts say would risk military operations. Last Congress, we got the Department of Defense and the Department of Commerce to agree that we should test bed the next generation of technology because we don't like interference. Now, I'm sure most Americans sitting at home thinking, what is she talking about? Well, if you drive in a car and you have a radio station and all of a sudden the radio station doesn't get its signal or has some interference, you know that there is an issue. The tower, not big enough, not strong enough. This is the same. This radio spectrum has been used by Department of Defense for secure purposes, very important secure purposes. Mr. President, think of the Chinese balloon and the fact that we want to detect when a Chinese balloon is flying through our airspace. We want to be able to stop people from spying on the United States of America. And yet, instead of basically saying, we are going to look at this military spectrum and make sure that it continues to be secure, my colleague is suggesting to all of us that we sell that and basically allow, I believe, for what is going to be a good amount of interference without solving this problem first. Why does that bother me? Because I think we live in a world where you're going to see more and more spectrum, more and more warfare based on satellite and communication, and the landscape is changing. So I certainly don't want our military preparedness to be affected. Air Force leaders warned that spectrum bands are crucial to this radar operations, and I'm not going to go into more about why, but I'm just saying, just like you can't have 4 radio stations basically interfering with each other, my colleagues want to allow the major telcos, mostly AT&T and Verizon, who are so hungry to sell more, whatever it is, $79.99 plans or $59.99 plans. They literally are going to give away national security just so they can sell more telephone plans. In fact, I would ask them, what have you done to clean up the last disaster that you had when the Chinese hacked you on Salt Typhoon? Now, they didn't successfully hack the telecom company in my state because they were smart enough to do all the preparatory work not to be hacked. But these guys didn't do the work, and now they're up here pushing our colleagues to say, give us more, give us more, give us more, without doing the homework required to figure out how to make sure our military is protected. But what's even more infuriating is they want the same spectrum from our airlines as well. They want to cause confusion between the spectrum of aviation and in this telecommunication. Last time the Trump administration did this, there was a major debate, and the White House and the Biden administration had to come in and fix it. It's all related to the altimeter on a plane. Again, the presiding officer knows this well. An altimeter helps tell the plane what altitude they're at and what to do. But if you have interference with that altimeter, as we just saw in this helicopter accident, we're pretty sure now that this accident between an American plane, regional jet, and an Air Force helicopter, there were some altimeter issues, and that caused a discrepancy and a crash. So I am not for any interference with an aviation altimeter. I'm not for it. But instead of figuring this out, working together, both commercial and defense, we're jamming into a bill the overriding of the defense interests and saying just give it to these 2 commercial bidders, maybe more, who then will basically just feel empowered to sell more of these telco plans. Ms. President, our competitiveness is too important. Our effectiveness is too important. Collaboration and working together to solve these problems is how the United States is going to succeed. Basically, trying to pit each other against each other in these kind of technology issues is not going to help us win. So, Mr. President, I've outlined many issues here, and I've outlined how you could fund Medicaid without basically doing what we are doing here. There is no reason. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model and analysis, families in the first 40% of earners are on average projected to experience losses in after-tax income and benefit transfers. In other words, Mr. President, yes, extending the 2017 tax cuts does help some middle-class families, and we would support that, but all the hits in other areas like health insurance mean they will actually lose money overall. The lowest 20% of income brackets are hit even harder. So in this massive bill, it is those who can least afford it who are going to be hit the hardest. We don't need the Trump inflation. We need to protect healthcare. We need to make progress in America's competitiveness. But this is not the answer, and I encourage my colleagues to vote against it. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Vermont. Thank you.
Mr. President, President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, now on the floor of the Senate, is the most dangerous piece of legislation in the modern history of our country. It is a gift to the billionaire class while causing massive pain for low-income and working-class Americans. Actually, though, Mr. President, I'm wrong. This is not a gift to the billionaire class. They paid for it. This bill is an absolute reflection of a corrupt campaign finance system which allows billionaires to buy elections. And when billionaires spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to elect a president or a senator or a member of Congress, they're not making that investment just for the fun of it. They want something in return, and this legislation, big time, is what they are getting in return. So what is in this bill that they invested in? Well, if you are in the top 1%, you and the class you represent will receive a $975 billion tax break. $975 billion tax break at a time when the richest people in this country have never ever had it so good. Further, this is really quite unbelievable. If you are among the wealthiest 0.2%, not talking about 1%, talking about the top 0.2%, you will be able to pay zero taxes on your $30 million inheritance. So all of you folks out there who are waiting to inherit at least $30 million, today is a good day for you. Collectively, you will receive approximately $211 billion in tax breaks for the top 0.2%. Congratulations, you hit the jackpot. If you are a large corporation and you want to throw workers out on the street and replace them with artificial intelligence, or maybe you want to shift your profits to the Cayman Islands or other tax havens, you are going to get a $918 billion tax break. Congratulations to the CEOs of large, profitable corporations. But while the rich and large corporations make out like bandits in this bill, what does it do for low-income and working families? Well, let me say a few words on that. If you are concerned about health care, which I suspect that everybody in the world is, this bill throws over 16 million people off the health insurance they have, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by cutting Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act by over $1.1 trillion. In other words, the top 1% getting a $975 billion tax break, and that is coming directly by throwing 16 million people off of the health insurance they have. This bill, for the first time, forces millions of Medicaid recipients who make as little as $16,000 a year to pay a $35 copayment every time they visit a doctor's office. So what is the impact of all of that? You throw 16 million people off healthcare, you charge most people who don't have any money pay a $35 copayment. So what's the impact of it? Well, this is not my view. This is what the Yale School of Public Health and the University of Pennsylvania determined based on a study that they did. And this is the result. And it is almost so horrific, so grotesque, that it is difficult to speak about. But they estimate that if this bill goes through with all of these cuts in healthcare, If 16 million people are thrown off of the insurance they have, over 50,000 Americans will die unnecessarily every year. 50,000 Americans will die unnecessarily in order to give tax breaks to billionaires who don't need them. In other words, this bill is literally a death sentence for low-income and working-class people. Further, if this legislation is enacted, rural hospitals all over the country, and I come from one of the most rural states in America, rural hospitals are already struggling. But when you make massive cuts to Medicaid, many of them are going to shut down or not be able to provide the level of services they do today. In other words, this bill would be a disaster for rural America. It would also make massive cuts to community health centers and nursing homes who are very heavily dependent upon Medicaid funding. Bottom line is that this legislation is the most significant attack on the health care needs of the American people in our country's history. We already have, as everybody knows, a healthcare system which is broken, which is dysfunctional, and instead of addressing it, instead of doing what every other major country on earth does, guarantee healthcare to all people, we are throwing 16 million people off the health insurance that they have. But it's not just healthcare. The future of America rests with our children. And yet, in a nation which now has the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, this bill wipes out nutrition assistance for millions of hungry kids in America. We are literally taking food out of the mouths of hungry kids to give tax breaks to Mr. Bezos and Mr. Musk and Mr. Zuckerberg and the other multi-billionaires. If we understand that if we're going to compete effectively in the global economy, we need to have the best education system in the world, this bill makes $350 billion in cuts in education, with the result that working class kids will find it much harder to get the higher education they need to succeed in life. If you are concerned about the existential threat of climate change, and we're seeing heat waves right now all over the world, this bill decimates investments in energy efficiency and sustainable energy like wind and solar, and moves us in exactly the wrong direction with regard to energy. If you are concerned about our role in never-ending wars, this bill makes a bad situation even worse by handing out another $150 billion to the Pentagon, a 15% increase in an already bloated Pentagon budget. We don't have enough money to feed hungry children. We don't have enough money to make sure that people continue to have the health care that they need. Don't have enough money to make sure the kids can get a decent education. But somehow, the military-industrial complex is going to get another $150 billion, 15% increase. Mr. President, in my view, nobody in the Senate or the House should vote for this legislation, and I applaud all of the Democrats for voting against it, and I want to congratulate two Republicans, Senator Paul and Senator Tillis, for voting against it for different reasons, by the way, than I have. But I do find it interesting, and it does tell us where we are as a nation today, that when one of those senators, Senator Tillis, voted against it because he thought it was not a good bill for the people of his home state, North Carolina, suddenly the President of the United States went after him in a very, very vicious way. And today he announced that he will not be seeking re-election. So it appears now that the Republican Party has really become a party of the cult of the individual. The only thing you have to do now as a Republican is say, I agree with President Trump. I love President Trump. President Trump is right all of the time. Hey, that's all you got to do now to be a good Republican. There was a day when Republicans and Democrats understood that they were elected by their constituents. Yeah, you want to work with the president of your own party, nothing to do about that. But there was an understanding that you were also elected to represent your constituents and not simply pay homage and bow down to every wish and whim of the president. Mr. President, during the vote-a-rama, I will be offering several amendments, which I hope will win support. Number one, at a time when 22% of our nation's seniors are trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year, my first amendment would fundamentally improve their lives in two significant ways. Number one, it would cut the price of prescription drugs under Medicare in half by making sure that our nation's seniors do not pay any more than Europeans or Canadians pay for the same exact drugs. And number two, with those savings, we're going to expand Medicare to cover dental, vision, and hearing. In other words, instead of throwing people off of health care, we're going to expand Medicare to provide a number of services that seniors desperately need and want. Secondly, President, at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, my second amendment would eliminate the $211 billion estate tax for the top 0.2% that is included in this bill. They get a top 2%, as I mentioned, $211 billion tax rate. That is insane. We're going to get rid of that. And lastly, at a time when we spend more on the military than the next 9 nations combined, at a time when the Pentagon cannot account for trillions of dollars in assets, we are going to end the provision that allowed the Pentagon to receive another $150 billion. Bottom line, Mr. President, is this country faces many crises: high rate of childhood poverty, kids going hungry, education system in deep trouble, healthcare system completely broken. And in virtually every single area, this bill takes us in precisely the wrong direction. When the wealthiest people in this country have never ever had it so good, it is totally insane to be offering them $1 trillion in tax breaks so that we can cut healthcare, education, and nutrition. This bill is not what the American people want, and I hope very much we can defeat it. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Sergeant on to the slow order. The Sergeant of Arms will restore order. The Sergeant of Arms will restore order in the galley. The Sergeant of Arms will restore order. Sergeant of Arms will restore order in the galley. Sergeant of Arms will restore order in the galley.
Yes.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President, I thank my colleagues for coming to the floor. Wait, we'll put this up when we begin. I'll leave it up. I thank my colleagues for coming to the floor all day today. I thank them for speaking so fiercely, so clearly about what's at stake for the country. And the American people deserve to see this debate. That's why we last night forced a reading of the bill. Republicans don't want people to know what's in the bill. They want to hide it. They know it's not popular. We all know it's not popular. We all know it's totally against what people want. But a small cabal of very wealthy people, hard MAGA people, run that show to the detriment of the party itself and, of course, to the American people. So we forced a reading of the bill last night and allowed people to catch up because the bill was just put on the floor right before the reading started, the amended bill. So we're here today to continue to shine a light on how bad this bill is, and this debate will continue. Soon we'll turn to vote-a-rama and bring amendment after amendment after amendment to the floor, so Republicans can defend their billionaire tax cuts, so they can try to explain their massive cuts to Medicaid to people back home. Why kids who need health care shouldn't get it, so there can be tax breaks for billionaires. Why middle-class families who have someone in a nursing home who's now going to be removed from that nursing home because it's going to close, what they're going to do. And to try and to sell to parents and kids why they're making unprecedented cuts to SNAP. Taking food from hungry babies for a tax cut for wealthy people? What kind of world do these Republicans live in? It's a slanted world. It's really a corrupt world. Kids will get $5 a day to feed themselves. You can't buy a dozen eggs for $5. And then they're killing millions of good-paying jobs. It's estimated, and by the way, the clean energy cuts are even worse. Before this, it was estimated 850,000 jobs would be lost in America on clean energy alone. Over 1 million jobs in healthcare. 2 million jobs approximately lost. At least 2 million lost because of this bill. That could create a recession. So this has been a long few days in the Senate, but the hardest choices for Republicans are still in front of them. Because we know that so many of our colleagues on the other side aren't happy with this bill. Tillis is not an exception. There are many others who think the same way he does. Well, they ought to vote their principles, their conscience, and what's good for their constituencies. Our side is going to give our Republican colleagues a chance to do the right thing in front of this chamber and in front of this nation. The American people deserve to know exactly what's happening right now in the United States Senate. Because right now, Republicans are concocting the ultimate rush job. They're trying to pull off a sneak attack on this chamber and on the American people themselves. The bill before the Senate is utter poison. Some Republicans are trying to rush through a bill that they released less than 2 days ago under the cloak of darkness, written behind closed doors, molded in order to appease Donald Trump and the very special, powerful interests. Earlier today, my colleague from South Carolina came to the floor with a pretty interesting-looking floor chart, where he claimed that his bill somehow reduced the debt by $500 billion. What a joke. The budget chair respectfully needs to check his math, because somehow Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Budget Committee, said that his bill reduces the debt by $500 billion. The budget chair, respectfully, check your math, Chairman Graham, because not 1 hour ago, the JCT confirmed this bill does not reduce the debt, it explodes it. It explodes it. That's what it does. Here's what his chart should have looked like. $4.545 trillion deficit explosion. According to the JCT, the Republican bill explodes the debt by $4.5 trillion. As this chart, drawn slightly better than Lindsay's, shows. For those keeping score at home, my colleague got his math wrong by a whopping $4 trillion. All this, just so billionaires are rewarded while millions lose their health care. Like $4.5 trillion deficit explosion. And that's not just an abstract concept. What does that mean? The average American will pay more to buy a home. The average American will pay more to buy a car. The average American will pay more on their credit card debt, on issue after issue after issue. Prices will go up because of this deficit, because of taxes for the billionaire. That's $4.45 trillion. Also, some people, wealthy people, God bless them, they made a lot of money, okay. They don't need a tax break. Let it be known that this bill is the death knell of the supposed party of fiscal responsibility. We always knew that this was a sham. And now this bill ends the charade of Republicans caring about the debt for all time coming. When they say they have to cut health care on any bill, or food stamps on any bill because it reduces the deficit, we will know it's utter hogwash because of $4.5 trillion they're doing now for tax breaks for the wealthy. So, Republicans want to move quickly. That's why we're here on the weekend. That's why they released a bill in the dead of the night, all because they want to hide the truth from the American people. You know, it's hard to believe, my colleagues. This bill is worse, even worse, than any draft we have seen thus far. Every time the bill comes to the floor, a new bill, a new amendment, the hard right handful over on the Republican side, we're not voting for it unless you hurt kids more, you hurt people who need health care more, you hurt rural hospitals more, you hurt clean energy more. And the Republican leadership folds and does it. And the handful of more mainstream Republicans who know how bad this is, right now haven't had the backbone to oppose those changes. We hope they find them. So, this bill is worse on health care, worse on SNAP. It'll kill 900,000 good-paying jobs in clean energy. Folks, you don't like paying your electricity bills? You'll pay 10% more on your electric bills because of this big, ugly betrayal. It'll also kill 1 million healthcare jobs. You put it all together, and there's no other way to put it. At the very last minute, the Senate Republicans made the bill more extreme to cater to the radicals in the House and the Senate. Republicans want to hide the truth so badly, in fact, that they're even ready to blow up the Senate rules to get it done. Senate Republicans are doing something that has never been done before in this chamber, never, by Democrats or Republicans, using fake math and budgetary hocus pocus to make it seem like the gargantuan tax break for billionaires is going to cost virtually nothing. That's insane. It's delusional. Current policy baseline doesn't take into account that our actual budget numbers show these cuts expiring. So when you put them back up again, the deficit increases. It's simple math, second grade math. But our colleagues, just again, in a frenzy to help the billionaires, are willing even to do that. Republicans know it. That's why they're squirming. You can see sort of the faces come on the floor. They don't look very happy because they know how bad this stuff is. They can use whatever budgetary gimmicks they want. Republicans can use whatever budgetary gimmicks they want to make their math work on paper. But you can't paper over the real consequences of adding trillions and trillions to the debt in one fell swoop. And CBO, nonpartisan, everyone who looks at this says it's going to increase the deficit. Not the so-called party of deficit hawks. That's out the window. So, what's going to happen when they pass this bill if they do? Hope they don't. Our children and grandchildren are going to be faced with a lifetime of higher borrowing costs. As I said, mortgage costs, costs to buy a car, costs for a credit card, harder to start a business. Every one of these will get worse. And the economic ceiling of this country will close in on itself. The economic engine that's been the driver of American innovation and growth and optimism for so many generations will sputter and ossify with this $4.45 trillion deficit explosion. It's deeply irresponsible to future generations, to our children, to our grandchildren, to pass this bill. And that's not just members on this side of the aisle saying it. Independent experts across the political spectrum, many of them very conservative Republicans, but who are at least honest about what they're doing, say it too. And plenty of Republicans in both the House and Senate have said it. It remains to be seen if their words and their actions will align. And the question is asked, has to be asked, why is this even happening? Why is this nightmare of a bill moving forward? Why are Republicans forcing our country down this ruinous road when they know the fiscal harms, when they know this is a rush job? Well, we know by now. Tax cuts to billionaires and corporate special interests. And not just another round, but in fact, they make them permanent. Our children, our grandchildren are going to be saddled with these cuts so that a handful of billionaires get a big break, while working people lose their Medicaid, while hungry kids lose access to food funding, while clean energy jobs that support so many Republican communities are taken away. I say to my Republican friends, when that plant that makes batteries or wind or solar, or the person who's employing hundreds of people to put panels on people's roofs all fold, and the people lose their jobs, don't shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know why that happened. You made it happen with a nasty bill. It just makes no sense. We need more energy. AI, everyone says we need more energy. And to take away the cheapest, quickest way to put more electrons on the grid, solar, makes no sense, except we know Donald Trump has an irrational, infantile mania against clean energy. So they're all listening to him. Makes no sense. This bill, sabotaging of America. It's the sabotaging of America. It's antithetical to what the country needs. It's antithetical to what the American people demanded last fall. And our Republican colleagues don't even want to tell the American people the truth. That's why Democrats are here on the floor today, sounding the alarm, setting the record straight. I also must say this. The way this bill is being passed so deeply violates the spirit of the Senate. The majority forgets that this chamber is unlike any other institution of government. It's meant to facilitate debate, careful consideration, sound judgment, honest numbers. We're supposed to resist the passions of the radical extreme. We're supposed to hold the line against policies that will devastate our country. We're supposed to resist the gravitational pull of extremists like Donald Trump, who gets these little bugaboos in his head and then wrecks America because of it, and they all go along. Senate Republicans are turning their back on the Senate's long-standing tradition of debate deliberation. By rushing this bill, by upending the rule of the chamber, by engaging in what amounts to accounting magic to hide the cost of their bill, Republicans, simply put, are accelerating the erosion of the Senate to the nth degree. Senate Republicans are turning their back on what makes this institution great. More importantly, they're turning their back on the people, their own constituents, in their own communities. People struggling to afford going to see a doctor. You have a child with cancer and you don't have health care? How can we put people in that position? Or families who have to choose between paying for groceries or paying for prescription drug costs. Or families who are watching their electricity bills go up and up. Families who are paying more and more costs. This bill, America, you don't want to pay higher costs? We don't want you to on our side of the aisle. The Republicans are making it happen. You will pay more and more and more. And about the future, they're not worried about our kids' livelihood. They're not worried that kids won't be able to find good-paying jobs. Families are worried about the future of this country. But the Republicans are not. And they're worried. Americans are worried about the continued radicalization of leaders in government. And here's the shining example. So the bill is the wrong answer for the American people. By every objective standard, it's deeply irresponsible. It's not only a violation of how the Senate's supposed to work, it's a violation of the promises that Republicans and Donald Trump, when they campaigned, made to the American people to look after their issues, not those at the very top. So I implore my Republican colleagues, there is still time. Abandon these terrible policies. We'll continue to have this debate in a real way, not jamming it through in the dark of night. My Democratic colleagues and I will continue exposing the truth. And if Republicans go down that road, we will continue to make sure today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, that the American people know exactly what happened here. I assure my Republican colleagues, I assure them this vote will not be forgotten. Their betrayal will not go unanswered. This bill must not stand. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Leader, for setting the record straight. It's really awful when we hear Republicans come down here and they just don't tell the truth about the bill that they are trying to pass. Maybe that's why they try to pass it in the middle of the night. They think no one will really notice.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I will.
Senator yield. All you have to do is look at their faces.
Yeah.
They know that what they're doing. They know it's unpopular. They know they're, as Senator Murkowski said, that they're all afraid. But it's time for them to stand up, isn't it?
Yep. So on Friday, I met Vivian. Vivian is an 11-year-old kid from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Vivian likes school. She likes her friends. She likes reading Harry Potter. She is a lot like any other 11-year-old. But for Vivi, going to school and being with her friends depends on Medicaid, because Medicaid covers the cost for her wheelchair, for her therapists, and for her health aid. Right now, Republicans are trying to rip away health care from kids like Vivian. The cruelty is truly breathtaking. I ask for one Republican senator, just one Republican senator, who plans to vote for this bill, to look into Vivi's eyes and tell her that her health care is just not a priority for this country. You know, Mitch McConnell said to Republican senators that he knew they were getting calls about Medicaid, not to worry about people losing their care, because, according to Mitch McConnell, they will get over it. So I ask the Republican senators to look at Vivi and Vivi's sisters and Vivi's mom and Vivi's dad and say, if Vivi loses her Medicaid and her wheelchair and her therapists and her health aid, tell all of them that they will get over it. Because here's the deal. Vivi won't get over it. Her family won't get over it. The people of North Carolina won't get over it. None of us, Massachusetts, Idaho, Louisiana, none of us will get over it. The cruelty here is off the charts. But the part that really burns is the Republicans are trying to slash the health care that keeps kids like Vivi alive so they can hand out more tax cuts for billionaires. It is beyond cruel. It is obscene. I am angry, and we should all be angry. Because instead of playing at the pool at the park like a regular kid on summer break, Vivian had to come here to Washington
to beg senators not to cut her health care. In a country as rich as ours, that shouldn't even be a question. Now, I actually don't think that my Republican colleagues have lost their hearts. They have lost their spines. It seems that all they can do now is bow down to Donald Trump and his billionaire donors. They will bow down, even if it means hurting families, community hospitals, and nursing homes in their own states. Trump wants the Republicans in Congress to hand out giant checks to the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations, and the Republican senators are willing to do that, even if it means kicking Vivi to the curb. Republicans know what they're doing. They know that this bill will hurt people. They know that this bill will kill people. And though it's hard to believe, they just look the other way. But on behalf of Vivi and millions of other kids and mamas and seniors and families who rely on the life-saving care that Medicaid makes possible, my Republican colleagues should grow a spine and stop this awful bill in its tracks. If it wasn't bad enough that this bill is set to rip away health care from 17 million Americans to pay for tax giveaways for billionaires, it actually has a bunch of other filthy giveaways buried in it too. Who wins if Republicans pass this big ugly bill? Billionaires, Wall Street, big tech, big oil, the wealthiest Americans, and the biggest corporations. Big oil will get a special get out of paying your taxes card. Now millions of people lose their health care coverage. Billions of dollars for big oil, nothing for Vivi. Meta, oh man, Meta, there's a company that's really struggling. Meta will win $15 billion to incentivize them to do research in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Think about that. Well, once a time machine comes with this, what Meta does in those 3 years is already done. But under this bill, Meta gets a $15 billion check on the day this bill passes, simply for existing, while families lose access to their health care. Wall Street wins big with a provision Republicans squeezed in that would slash funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Giant corporations want the opportunity to cheat American families again. So Republicans are desperately trying to take the cop off the beat. And who loses thanks to this big ugly bill? Americans who can't afford health care. Families who need a little extra help putting food on the table. Grandmas and grandpas in nursing homes. Little babies and their mamas. If Republicans pass this bill, 17 million Americans will have their health care ripped away. That number has kept growing as the Republicans keep making more and more changes to the bill. For them, it is just a question of how many more Americans they can rip away health care from. This bill would also make the biggest cut to food assistance for families, kids, and veterans in American history. And here's one to underscore. 1 out of every 4 nursing homes in America would have to shut down under this bill. You know, my Republican colleagues should just pull a few seniors who are in nursing homes in their home states and just go over the plans for where those folks are supposed to go next. What exactly do the Republicans have in mind for them? Maybe call the daughter of someone who's in one of those nursing homes and explain how she has to become a full-time caregiver once this bill passes. Maybe call just a few of the people whose lives you plan to tear apart. Budgets are about our values, and Republicans have made their values clear. They are willing to throw millions of Americans under the bus so that they can help out a handful of their billionaire buddies and giant corporations. They should be ashamed. Here's what Democrats believe. Democrats believe that no baby should go hungry so that Mark Zuckerberg can buy another Hawaiian island. Democrats believe that no person with a disability who needs a wheelchair or home health aid to live independently should have to give that up so that Jeff Bezos can buy a third yacht. And Democrats believe that no grandma should be pushed out of her nursing home so that Elon Musk can take a subsidized rocket ship ride to Mars. It doesn't have to be this way. What if, instead of tax breaks for billionaires, we make the rich pay their fair share? What if, instead of slashing health care for our kids, we make it possible for every American to see a doctor when they're sick without breaking the bank? And what if, instead of giving big oil more giant handouts, we make universal child care a reality for families all across this country? We can tax the rich. Damn it, if Jeff Bezos can afford to rent Venice for $50 million for his wedding, he can afford to pitch in his fair share of taxes so the next kid has a chance to make it big, and the kid after that, and the kid after that. We can make life better for working people. We can make it easier, not harder. We can lower costs for families, not jack them up even more like this bill does. We can put families first, not billionaires and billionaire corporations. Democrats believe this. Democrats are willing to fight for this. We will vote no on this awful bill. And for kids like Vivian, for seniors in nursing homes, for families who rely on home health aides, and for the millions more Americans that this bill will hurt, I urge my Republican colleagues, grow a spine and vote no. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator Morgan.
President, before she leaves the floor, I want to thank my colleague in particular for putting a human faith on what this is all about for us on this side of the aisle. That small child, the senior you were talking about. I'm going to pick up on what you said, and I thank you for your leadership. President, I'm going to get into the specifics of this horrifying bill in a moment, all the details of the healthcare carnage and the clean energy bloodbath that Republicans are dragging America toward. First, though, I want to spend just a few minutes on the state of the Senate and our democracy. As of a few hours ago, the rules of the Senate are whatever Republicans feel like when the day begins. It's democracy defined, plain and simple. The bill before the Senate is loaded. Fraudulent budget math that hides trillions of dollars in handouts to corporations and the ultra-wealthy. It's a violation of the rules that used to be followed for years for the reconciliation process. It's a violation of the Congressional Budget Act. It's a violation of common sense. Republicans decided that none of that mattered. So they've kind of gone nuclear to advance the bill. Apparently in this chamber, if the Republican chair of the Budget Committee said so, 1 + 1 = 3. That is unsustainable. We are going to be a sicker, poorer, and weaker country if this bill becomes law, and the Republicans have used this process, going nuclear, to pass it. But these moves cut both ways, and there'll be a lot of cleanup for Democrats to handle down the road. Now, in my time in public service, Mr. President, I have never seen a more destructive, regressive, common sense-defying bill debated in the Senate. This bill is going to determine the future of health care in America. Millions of Americans will lose their health insurance if Republicans pass the bill. My colleagues seem to be ignoring, for example, the fact that rural hospitals are the anchor of life in much of America. This bill will sever that anchor and set rural health care adrift. Here's how flawed the Republican plan is. The danger they're causing for rural hospitals is so great, Republicans have had to create a rural hospital relief fund. It is a Band-Aid on an amputation. I can tell you one thing I know for sure is only in Washington, D.C. would you create a relief fund to address a problem that you caused. How about you just not cut $1 trillion from Medicaid in the first place? Now, I wanted to get a sense of what rural America thought of this legislation. The last weekend, I held 4 town halls in 3 eastern Oregon counties. It's as rural as it gets. Donald Trump carried these counties overwhelmingly. One of them was Malheur County, where Donald Trump received more than 70% of the vote. This is where I held an open-to-all town hall meeting. It happens to have one of the highest Medicaid enrollments in the country. The message I heard was very clear and very loud. This bill will be a disaster for Malheur County on rural health. Now, healthcare is a top employer in America. If these cuts go through, the healthcare workforce in rural areas of our nation is going to be decimated. Nurses, doctors, and support staff will lose their jobs, and rural economies are going to suffer. Many of the Americans that will feel the consequences of this legislation today walk an economic tightrope. Many have multiple jobs. Millions more Americans will lose their benefits like home care and mental health, and services that already fall far short of what our people expect. These are overwhelmingly kids, people with disabilities, seniors, all to pay for more tax cuts for multinational corporations and the ultra-wealthy. It's not just the cuts. It's also a whole lot more red tape, making it harder for people to get care. At the center of the Republican Medicaid changes is a bunch of red tape thickets designed to entrap people into a never-ending maze of AI chatbots and phone trees that make it impossible for them to get the coverage they need. And even if you manage to get through all that bureaucratic water torture and sign up for Medicaid, the Republican plan says if you lose your job, you lose your health care. Why would the Congress want to inflict that on more people? Nobody I could find wants these cuts, no matter their political persuasion, and I was in places that were bright red. I'm sure most of us can agree there's a real debate to be had on how we can make healthcare more affordable and accessible, but this bill achieves none of that. Let me mention seniors. My colleagues have touched on the elderly. 2 in 3 nursing home beds in America are covered by Medicaid. If Republicans pass this into law, conditions will deteriorate. Seniors will be forced out of their nursing homes or forced to move in with family that doesn't have the necessary skills to care for their aging parents or grandparents. Nursing homes would be forced to shut their doors as a result of these cuts during a time when states are in desperate need of more nursing home options, not fewer. The bill also repeals nursing home safety standards. That's going to mean fewer nurses in nursing homes. You would think that'd be a concern of Republicans in the Trump administration. But when the Finance Committee was considering the nomination of CMS Administrator Mehmet Oz, he said, and I quote, "I believe we can provide quality of care equivalent to having a nurse in that nursing home using tools and technologies." Dr. Oz was apparently talking about AI. And I said, "You're for cutting nurses. What's going to happen when an 85-year-old woman has to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and needs some help?" he had no answers, but he's still being a big booster on artificial intelligence. I'm deeply troubled about what the Trump administration has in store for America's seniors. That's on top of the fact that home-based care that most seniors prefer will be one of the first benefits states are forced to cut because it's optional now rather than mandatory. Hundreds of thousands of seniors, Mr. President, are going to see a premium increase of about $200 a month. The bill also applies the worst forms of corporate red tape to the Affordable Care Act. Shorter enrollment periods, more verification forms, more hoops, more bureaucracy, more red tape for Americans who just want affordable health care. And the health care carnage may get worse with the Republican amendments coming up. My understanding that they're going to offer an amendment that would lower the federal Medicaid match for new enrollees in what's known as the Medicaid expansion. That was a key part of the Affordable Care Act that delivered affordable health care to roughly 21 million Americans last year. If this amendment is adopted, taken together with the other awful policies in the bill, it would amount to repealing the Affordable Care Act and making good on the 15-year Republican crusade to dismantle that law. Millions more working Americans, Mr. President, are going to lose their health insurance, and it would break a promise to the 41 states that have expanded Medicaid, many of them red states. These health care cuts aren't just going to be felt by Americans with Medicaid. And those who buy health insurance on their own are going to be similarly hit. Emergency room wait times are going to skyrocket, and premiums will spike. Families will be one lost job or financial calamity away from being tossed onto a safety net that has rips and tears everywhere you look. So many are going to fall between the cracks. I also wanted to touch on another horrendous provision on health care buried in the bill, the defunding of the Planned Parenthood program, and they're doing it in a way that's essentially a backdoor, nationwide abortion ban. This provision is going to strip clinics of their funding and make it impossible for them to provide life-saving health care. Cancer screenings, annual exams, all of that will disappear for the people that rely on these clinics for basic care. The health care cuts are getting a big focus, Mr. President, myself, my colleagues, because of the challenge for so many communities. But there's something else that's absolutely imperative. That's the clean energy bloodbath, and it certainly deserves attention. In the middle of the night, Friday into Saturday, the bill that was already a disaster for clean energy got much, much, much worse. What Republicans have on offer doesn't just repeal the tax credits that I wrote for wind and solar energy in the Finance Committee. Now we've got an actual massacre on our hands. This Republican plan actually taxes wind and solar, a new tax on the cheapest and easiest way to get new energy to the grid. At the same time, somebody tucked into the bill a brand new tax break for coal. So here we are, 2025, and the Senate is about to pass a bill that taxes wind and solar while subsidizing coal. It is so backward, it leaves you slack-jawed. When you look at this bill, it's awfully clear that the Republican goal is to destroy key sources of clean energy in America. It's a death sentence for the wind and solar industries in our country. The total abandonment of hundreds of thousands of workers who are about to lose their jobs is a direct result of the bill. The head of the North American Building Trades Union, that represents millions of construction workers, issued a stunning statement on the bill yesterday. I'll read a few select lines from the statement. He said, "It's the biggest job-killing bill in the history of the country," is how he described the Republican plan. Staggering and unfathomable job loss, a threat to an estimated 1.75 million construction workers. And this union leader said it was the equivalent terminating 1,000 Keystone XL pipelines. And it was another lifeline and competitive advantage to China in the race for global energy dominance. He also said critical infrastructure projects will be sacrificed at the altar of ideology. Mr. President, those were all direct quotes. Hundreds of billions of dollars in clean energy investments under the Republican plan will simply disappear. Not government subsidies or handouts. These are private sector investments we will not have. And even worse, this is a guaranteed way to hike utility bills for families and businesses of all sizes in every nook and cranny of America. I have never seen this kind of economic self-sabotage. The demand for energy booms right now. Even the heads of companies involved in fossil fuels are saying to me and other members of Congress, we need solar quickly to get more electrons to the grid. But Republicans don't want to listen because this plan risks plunging us into an energy crisis. It would be a disaster and a total surrender to China and clean energy manufacturing. It's clear as a sunny day that all the talk from Donald Trump and Republicans about American energy dominance was just a fraud, nothing but a hollow campaign slogan. And I'll close with this. There is no question in my mind, Mr. President, the American people went to the polls in 2024 to vote for cheaper groceries, cheaper utilities, and cheaper gas. They didn't vote to kick 16 million people off their health care so Republicans can give more tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. They didn't vote for an energy crisis that benefits nobody except big oil investors. There is a real cost of living crisis facing American families right now. And this Senate ought to be focused on finding ways to lower drug prices, for example, expand access to quality and affordable health care, and bring down the cost of living. Instead, Republicans are using every ounce of their power to jam through another round of tax breaks for those at the very top, and they're doing it on the backs of everybody else. There are serious challenges ahead, Mr. President, and there's going to be a serious mess cleaning up. But until then, countless Americans will needlessly suffer and die as a direct result of losing their health care under this legislation. I don't believe the American people are going to forget. On this side of the aisle, we'll make certain that this topic is something that's dealt with again and again until the American people finally get a fair shake. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Hawaii.
presiding officer is a distinguished businessman. He understands capital flows. He understands investment. There are a lot of people in this chamber and across the country who, on a non-ideological basis, want a consistent tax code so that businesses can invest with certainty and predictability. So let's look at some of the numbers here in terms of the impact of this bill. This bill will kill 300,000 jobs in wind and solar per year. We're going to lose out on $450 billion in capital as thousands of projects go under. And because of that, we're going to generate about 500 gigawatts less energy in the next decade. Now, there was a time, and I lived through it as a politician, there was a time when people who wanted to take climate action had to argue for that climate action because it is a planetary emergency, and there were trade-offs. And people on the other side said, look, as we try to take action to deal with this planetary crisis, we can't create shortages, we can't increase prices, we can't impede economic progress. All that has flipped. This bill will create shortages. This bill will impede economic progress. This bill will increase prices. The 500 gigawatts less energy in the next decade is pretty much exactly the amount of energy that we're going to need to meet rising demand. We are going to have energy shortages as a result of this legislation. And you don't have to love clean energy or be an environmentalist, and I love clean energy and I'm an environmentalist. But you don't have to care about the climate. I think you should. You don't have to care about the climate to understand that this is a basic question of supply and demand. Energy demand is soaring for the first time in decades, largely, not exclusively, but largely because of AI data centers. And our best chance of meeting it in the next few years is with wind and solar, not oil and gas. Even nuclear and geothermal are going to take a while. That is not just a political talking point or a preference of mine. It's just a fact that gas turbines are stuck in a years-long backlog. It's also a fact that 80% of the new capacity on the grid last year came from solar and storage. It's growing, it's cheap, it works. There are hundreds more projects that are in the pipeline waiting to be hooked up. So the idea that we're gonna kill the only energy that can be brought online in the short run, the very same week that half the country was melting in a record heat wave, which left tens of thousands without power, is beyond absurd. Let's talk about how this bill does all of this damage. Specifically, it creates an impossible deadline for projects to be operational in order to claim the clean energy tax credits. Remember, these clean energy tax credits are federal law. They're on the books. So when you have a federal statute, it is not unreasonable as an investor to say, look, I got this tax credit, I'm gonna get X percent back for my initial investment. And you do the pro forma, you do the underwriting, and you figure out that the thing pencils out. And now what they're saying is that you gotta be operational in 60 days. If anyone has even built a deck in their front yard or tried to do an extension, nothing gets built in 60 days, certainly not a clean energy project. And it has to be placed in service. What does placed in service mean? It means not only do you have to have the thing built, you have to have a power purchase agreement through your Public Service Commission or Public Utilities Commission. You have to have a deal in place in the next 60 days after enactment, or you get nothing. So imagine you're a company investing in a solar or battery storage project. You've already put money down. You've secured land and a power purchase agreement, and you're working on permits. And when you started the project, the tax code said you could claim a credit to cover the upfront costs. Now, unless you are fully operational, you're out of luck. On average, a project takes 4 years to go through the full process. So even if you've already started that progress, you now have very, very little time to get it done. We are going to strand hundreds of billions of dollars in capital. And so the impact on price is going to be crazy. The impact on jobs is going to be crazy. But the impact on America as an investable proposition is the most dangerous part of this. I don't know that we've ever, through federal law, made a big subsidy, made a big bet on a certain industry, and then halfway through that process said, never mind, we didn't mean that, you're stuck. According to the Edison Electric Institute, and by the way, I can guarantee you, this is the first and maybe last time I will ever quote the Edison Electric Institute. That'll cost people, not companies, people, ratepayers, $60 billion in this decade alone. Your electric bills are about to go up. A representative of a solar company in Hawaii put it this way: it is really unclear in the current version of the bill what the renewable energy industry even looks like if it were passed today. An owner of a solar company in Montana worried that the credits disappearing would force him to lay off half of his workers. He says, Montana is deeply red, but it's also a very practical place. And so green energy renewables became a taboo phrase somehow. The practical energy needs are undeniable, so we can get past our disagreements about phraseology. We realize that electrons, watts, amps, it's all cheaper. A representative of a wind turbine company in Colorado said, I don't look at what we do as green or blue or red. An electron doesn't have a color, and that's the point. Electrons don't have color. Wanting cheap, abundant energy is not woke. Wanting a livable planet for today and for future generations is not radical. And wanting reliable power and to avoid blackouts and brownouts is not a leftist project. But even if you set all of that aside for a minute, the states that have benefited the most from these investments are Republican states. According to estimates, nearly 3/4 of clean energy manufacturing facilities are located in Republican states. It means that Republicans are going to pay more for energy. It means Republicans will lose jobs in clean energy because of a Republican bill. It means Republicans are going to have more blackouts in their homes and businesses. Gutting clean energy is not somehow owning the libs. And at least some Republicans in the Senate and the House understand that, even if their votes have not manifested to say otherwise. Here's a letter from 21 House Republicans earlier this year. As our conference has long believed, an all-of-the-above energy approach combined with a robust advanced manufacturing sector will help support the United States' position as a global energy leader. Countless American companies are utilizing sector-wide energy tax credits, many of which have enjoyed broad support in Congress to make major investments in domestic energy production and infrastructure for traditional and renewable sources alike. And it goes on, as energy demand continues to skyrocket, any modifications that inhibit our ability to deploy new energy production risks sparking an energy crisis. 21 House Republicans are worried about an energy crisis imposed by the Republican Congress. It goes on. This is especially true for energy credits with direct pass-through benefit to ratepayers, where such repeals would increase utility bills the very next day. This is not me, progressive senator from the state of Hawaii, who has made a career out of fighting climate change. This is 21 House Republicans saying, like, we're going to create a crisis here. Maybe we shouldn't pass this thing. A lot of this stuff benefits us. If we're all out here talking about all of the above, why are we cutting off our nose to spite our face just because someone wants a talking point? Like, people are literally going to lose their jobs immediately upon enactment. America is going to become a very challenging place to make major investments in immediately upon enactment. The AI industry may move abroad immediately upon enactment, and prices will go up pretty much right away as well. A group of 175 mayors and local leaders wrote, for the first time, state and local governments, as well as essential nonprofit community organizations, such as houses of worship, hospitals, and schools, can access the same clean energy tax credits as the private sector through elective pay. This has led to major projects in our communities like solar installations for town halls, alternative fueling infrastructure, and charging stations for local government fleets. After 1 year of direct pay implementation, over 1,200 organizations, including 500 state and local governments, are already accessing these incentives. We are excited about these projects and the benefits that they will bring to our communities. However, as local leaders, we are concerned that repealing these tax credits would create economic uncertainty in our communities, as it would prevent us from accessing those important benefits. You know, I grew up to understand Republican. Look, I didn't grow up as a Republican, but I did understand Republicans were for avoiding unintended consequences. Republicans were against radical change too quickly. Republicans wanted a solid business environment that people could rely upon. This is literally none of that. This is ideology manifesting itself as energy policy. And what's going to happen is people are going to lose their jobs and pay tons more for electricity. The building trades union called this bill, quote, the biggest job-killing bill in the history of this country. And they go on, simply put, it is the equivalent of terminating more than 1,000 Keystone XL pipeline projects. I've been here for a while. Keystone XL was a big deal to our friends in labor. I had some very tough conversations with my friends in labor about how important that project was to them, and how it was in tension with some of our climate goals. But listen to what they say. It is the equivalent of terminating 1,000 Keystone XL pipeline projects. These guys are not me or Jeff Merkley or Eddie Markey or Sheldon Whitehouse or Martin Heinrich or Rep. Ocasio-Cortez or any climate advocate. This is the building trades. And they're saying this is the biggest job killer perhaps in American history. We actually don't have to do this, you know? The impetus behind this bill was essentially border spending and preventing the Trump tax cuts from expiring. And then a bunch of stuff got added on because that's what happens. And we were there for our own version of this, our own BBB, our own Build Back Better, and everybody in your party piles on with something new. And then the thing becomes a really challenging thing to pass because everybody's got their hobby horse. And somebody's hobby horse is not just to have an all of the above energy strategy, but to go out of your way to kill clean energy. It doesn't matter that it's going to raise prices. It doesn't matter that it's going to kill jobs. People at all levels in the public and private sectors across the political spectrum are all saying the same thing, which is this is a bad bill for regular people, for the economy, and for the planet. One of the great things about our climate bill was that it made what was good for the planet also good for the economy. Clean energy became eminently profitable for businesses and widely accessible to consumers. And we made a choice there because some in our party didn't like the basic premise. They were attached to the idea of personal, political, economic sacrifice because the planet is in peril. And I understand that instinct. But we paved a new path and we decided, look, there's enough technology out there. There are abundant energy sources out there that we can actually solve our planetary crisis and create jobs and lower prices. And we can do it in such a way that blue states and red states, urban, rural, suburban, all benefit. Republicans are on the verge of undoing all of that, even though it will hurt their constituents. And in doing so, we're virtually guaranteeing China's dominance in clean energy for decades to come, because if you're China, you cannot believe your luck. Your biggest competitor is willingly forfeiting the fight over who controls the energy technologies of the future because Donald Trump is too busy trying to get us back to the pre-industrial age. This is the worst piece of legislation for the planet in the history of our country, and it's not even close. Republicans are effectively codifying big oil's wish list into law without exception. They are killing clean energy. They are subsidizing coal. They are dramatically expanding oil and gas leasing. They are purposely jacking up energy prices and creating shortages. And for what? Partially, it's to find enough savings to shovel tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of dollars into the pockets of individual billionaires. But even kicking more than 16 million people off of healthcare coverage, denying food to the poor, and adding almost $5 trillion to the national debt was not enough. People voted for Donald Trump for all sorts of reasons, but no one voted for higher energy bills. No one voted for more frequent blackouts and brownouts and dirtier air and water. No one, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or independent, wants that. I want to be clear. This fight is far from over. This fight over this bill is far from over, but even if this bill passes, it will set us back. But the fight for the planet is bigger than any one bill or vote, and that includes the big climate bill that we passed in the previous administration. And as any movement that has successfully mobilized and made changes knows, progress is not linear. Progress always has setbacks and frustrations. Progress is not assured. States like Hawaii will continue to do everything that they can to protect our environment, and the rest of the world will move on without us. because doing nothing in the face of this worsening crisis is simply not an option. But make no mistake, what Congress is doing today will cost all of us in the years and decades to come. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I rise today, and I will confess, I rise today a bit angry about this bill. This bill cooked up in back rows, dropped at midnight, cloaked in fake numbers, with huge handouts to big Republican donors. It loot our country for some of the least deserving people you could imagine. When I first got here, this chamber filled me with awe and wonderment. Our leader, Harry Reid, frequently called me his happiest senator. Such was the awe and wonderment that I felt here. Today, I feel disgust. This piece of legislation is corrupt. This piece of legislation is crooked. This piece of legislation is a rotten racket.
Yes.
This place feels to me today like a crime scene. Get some of that yellow tape and put it around this chamber. The midnight transfer of wealth in this bill is disgusting. There's a backdrop here. The backdrop here is the wealth inequality in our country already, in which the wealthiest 1% of our population own 30% of the wealth, and the poorest half of our population together only own 3% of the wealth. Top 1%, a third of the wealth. Bottom half of the population by income, 3% of the wealth. And against that backdrop, this bill transfers wealth from middle-class families to giant corporations, billionaires, and mega-billionaires. And it transfers wealth from our children and grandchildren to present-day billionaires by adding $5 trillion to the debt limit to run up the debt of the country to fund the tax giveaways to these special interest and wealthy billionaires. How do they do that? Take away health care from 16 million Americans. Give huge tax breaks to billionaires. Most families have someone sit down once a month and go through the bills. And you try to figure out what bills you can pay. You may not pay the whole insurance bill. You may just pay the minimum. You may not pay your whole credit card bill. You may just pay the minimum. You're aware of exactly how much money you have because you need to make those payments. That's kitchen table world. Billionaire world is different. You have a family office, you never see bills. You don't even know how much money you have, not even to the nearest $100,000. And you don't care. Because you have more than you could ever spend in your life. You can pay taxes, like regular people. But there's something about your acquisition of wealth that can't stop. So you won't pay taxes like a normal person. You demand special treatment. You pay less of a tax rate than a firefighter, for God's sake. And that's not enough for you? Now you come here to this Senate floor wanting even more favors? You already don't know how much money you have. You could pay regular taxes and it wouldn't take a day from sunning on your private island, a day from cruising in your private yacht, a jet trip on your private jet, a ski trip to your private chalet. Nothing in your life would change if you had to pay taxes like a regular person, but you just don't want to. And the third is, I should add, on the tax breaks, a lot of it goes to corporations. This bill doesn't just give big tax breaks to big corporations. It gives big tax breaks to big corporations that move jobs and investment offshore away from America. And it just doesn't give tax breaks to corporations that move jobs and investment offshore away from America. It gives tax breaks for doing that. It gives tax breaks for offshoring American jobs and offshoring American investment. It is the world's worst tax policy. It takes an already corrupted tax code and bends it even further in the favor of mega billionaires and big offshoring corporations. And last, what does this bill do that causes this transfer of wealth from regular people to the wealthy? It raises your costs to raise their profits. I'm here to talk about one way that happens. Because of this bill, your electric bills will go up. The people behind this bill are counting on you not to know how that works. So, I'm going to take a minute here, and I'm going to tell you how that works. There are some rules for the grid about how this works. Generators who want to sell power to the grid put in a bid, and they give a price at which they will sell their electricity. You can imagine on this graph that each of these little hash marks is a different generation facility, and each has made a bid at its best price. Once it's got the stack of bids, the grid manager, as the load comes onto the grid, dispatches the cheapest generators first, and then goes up the stack to the more and more expensive ones. As demand rises, the costs go up. The last one that's called on, the most expensive one that's called on, sets the price for the whole grid. And this last one that the price setter on the grid, almost always a fossil fuel plant. Okay? It's almost always a fossil fuel plant. So if you look at this graph, you'll see here, this measures the price that's charged to put those electrons on the grid for consumers. And this is the energy demand. How much consumers are asking? What does the grid need to supply? And if you look at the top line, this is the world without renewables. This is an all fossil fuel system, let's say. Baseload nuke, okay, throw that in. And as the demand goes up, the prices go up because more and more of these generators have to come online. And eventually, let's say you get to this point where you've got this much load on the grid and you've got this much supply and the price is set by that generator. That's the world without clean energy. Now you add clean energy, you add renewables to this equation. What do we know about the renewables? They're almost always cheaper. They're almost never the price setter. So they fill in down here, and they fill in below the price of the fossil fuel plant. So if you've got load requirement X, and you live in fossil fuel only world, you're going to be paying that price for energy on the grid. All of it. Because it's set by that price setter generator. But if you fill it with renewables, then you're down here for price for that much load. You're saving huge amounts of money. The grid is way more efficient with renewables in the mix. By the time you get to the same price that you had here for load X, for fossil fuel, you're all the way out here. You got all this extra load served before you raise that price. That's the theory. That's how the system works. Let's see how clean energy fits in a specific area. Let's look at Texas. Oh, and by the way, last year, 95% of the power that came on the grid that filled in here was clean energy. If this bill kills clean energy growth, which is its intention, then it's going to kill off the power source that provided 95% of what was added to the grid last year. It is going to be a big, big hit. So let's look at the Texas grid, which is easy to talk about because it's a standalone grid. And somebody just did a study of the Texas grid. And they found that with renewables, and Texas is 30% renewables, okay? So we're in the with renewable situation. With renewables, the average price last August was $39 per megawatt hour. This was $39. And then they calculated what happened if you backed out all the solar that had been added. If it weren't for the solar driving this price down, instead of $39 per megawatt hour, it would have been somewhere between $55 and $90 per megawatt hour. Minimum $25 differential. Maybe more than twice the cost. The punchline, quoting from the report, had there been no growth in solar energy between 2018 and 2024, wholesale electric prices in 24 would have been at least 40% higher. Without the clean energy growth of that 95% of supply that came onto the grid that was clean energy last year, electricity prices would have been 40% higher. And where would that 40% have gone? It would have gone into the pockets of the fossil fuel industry that was setting that price as everybody had to pay more and more and more. So when you see the fossil fuel industry come here and take this shot at its clean energy competition in this bill after having flooded that side with political money, they're going to make a fortune off of this. And consumers will pay. That's how this bill robs you. It puts you back onto the fossil fuel side of that curve, not onto the clean energy added part of the curve, which lowers prices so dramatically. And as the report concluded, I'm quoting again, this isn't speculation or modeling. It's what actually happened in one of America's largest electricity markets. And by the way, while the fossil fuel polluters are out trying to damage their competition using the power of government and the influence of their dark money operation to do so, they're also damaging America's competitiveness against China. China's already putting 25 times the solar that we are putting onto their grid. That gives them huge advantages as they construct solar panels, design solar technologies, and offer that to the rest of the world. We're in a world market for solar technology, just like we're in a world market for electric vehicles. And the fossil fuel industry's desire to destroy the American solar market and to destroy the American electric vehicle market is about as unpatriotic as you can get, because it is taking these two technologies and saying, go for it, China, we're out. We're out. Have the entire international market for solar and for energy. We're not going to compete. We're going to load up our people with new taxes. We're going to tear away the subsidies. And by the way, the fossil fuel industry that's telling you this, they're the recipients of the biggest subsidy in world history. They get $700 billion a year in the United States alone from being allowed to pollute for free. It violates market economics to pollute for free. Milton Friedman, the most conservative economist, will tell you it's not proper market theory when somebody's polluting for free. The cost of the pollution should be in the price of the product. So they already benefit. The fossil fuel industry already benefits from the biggest subsidy in world history, $700 billion with a B, $700 billion every single year to compete unfairly against clean energy. And on top of that, they want to rip away the investments that have been made, and they want to put a new tax on clean energy, and they want to drive consumer prices back up to their fossil fuel model. There's some really big losers in this big loser of a bill. Anybody who cares about adding $5 trillion to our national debt, that's a big loss. Comes through in interest rates for people with car loans and home loans. Healthcare. 16 million people getting chucked off their healthcare. Hospitals and nursing homes facing receivership as their revenues dry up from a nearly $1 trillion hit to their revenue streams. Taxpayers getting clobbered by an already corrupt tax code that this makes even worse for the individuals benefiting the most from the corruption of the tax code and who are the least deserving of our solicitude and who are the most able to pay. I promise you, there are people who will not know they even got this $300,000 individual billionaire benefit because they're so rich already it won't even count. And on the flip side of the coin, if they had to pay taxes like a normal American, they wouldn't even notice that either. They'd still be able to sun on their island, cruise on their yacht, ski in their chalet, and jet in their jet. And yet, we're breaking the bank to the tune of $5 trillion to take care of those people. Creepy billionaires who can't even count their wealth, but for some reason insist on coming to Congress and just seizing even more, looting the public trough. Offshoring corporations who get a special tax benefit for offshoring jobs and investment, moving them away from America. Remember, this was the America First agenda, not when you look into the weeds of this crooked bill. So creepy billionaires, offshoring corporations, and of course, fossil fuel polluters who want to pollute. They've got all the money in the world. They've made massive profits. They could do their own carbon removal and make their product safer. They choose not to. They choose not to because they want to pollute and they want to kill their competition so they can pollute more and profit more and drive up consumer prices, as I showed here. And guess what? The creepy billionaires, the offshoring corporations, and the fossil fuel polluters, what do they have in common? Huge donors to the Republican Party. That's what this bill is about. It's not about taking care of the economy. It's not about taking care of the public. It's payback to big special interests and billionaires who provide the dark money funding that floats the Republican Party, and now they're demanding payback for the majorities that they bought. There is a wasp, Mr. President, that lays its larvae inside another bug. And the larvae of the wasp inside that other bug are able to take over the nervous system of that other bug. They can take over the command and control system of the bug, and they start driving the bug around from the inside. They make it do what the larvae wants it to do. They make it go where the larvae want to be. They make it hang where the larvae want it to hang, and then the larvae consume it from the inside. They eat it, and they turn into the next generation of wasps. Get it? That's a pretty good analogy for what has happened here. Those creepy billionaires, those fossil fuel polluters, those big offshoring corporations have taken over the command and control system of the Republican Party. The bug over there is being marched around by those special interests doing exactly what it's told. And it doesn't care about the 16 million people coming off insurance, doesn't care about the added pollution, doesn't care about the increased cost, doesn't care about the unfairness, doesn't care about making the tax code more corrupt, because the special interests are in that bug running that show. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come today to explain my vote yesterday for voting against the motion to proceed on this bill. Mr. President, I spent most of my career in management consulting, managing large, complex enterprise projects, multi-year, thousands of hours, a lot of complexity that take people, process, and technology to make it work. I learned a lot in that career, and I was able to go to the legislature and take that mindset as a member of the minority for 2 terms, and then we got a majority in 2010, and I found myself being the Speaker of the House. Mr. President, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. When I got sworn in January of 2011, North Carolina had a $2 billion shortfall on a $20 billion general revenue fund. And I had 6 months to balance that budget. Well, Mr. President, we did something that had not been done in North Carolina. We took the time to understand every aspect and every dollar that was being spent in government. We determined how to cut government in a way that was sustainable. We cut 12% from the university system budget. Not the rate of growth, but the actual spending. And I had some people say that it was going to be disruptive and the University of North Carolina would never be the same again. But Mr. President, we did it in a way that was instructed by the operations of the university system. And we did it in a way in concert with the chancellors. And you know what happened, Mr. President? We actually balanced the budget. We did do those cuts. And the last time I checked, the North Carolina university system is still considered one of the greatest systems in the United States of America. Why do I use that example? Because the Medicaid proposal in this bill bears no resemblance to that kind of discipline and due diligence. It has no insights into how these provider tax cuts are going to be absorbed without harming people on Medicare. And even worse, most of my colleagues do not even understand on either side of the aisle the interplay of state-directed payments and the devastating consequences of the funding flows that are going to be before us. Mr. President, here's how I figured out the impact in North Carolina. I used to be Speaker of the House, and I like the Speaker and have a good relationship with the Speaker and the President Pro Tem, so I called them up. And I had my staff ask them if they would do an economic impact assessment on what this proposed bill would do to the Medicaid program in North Carolina. But I didn't want just the view of the Republican partisan staff that reports to the Speaker and the President Pro Tem on how they're going to absorb this bill. I decided to go to Josh Stein, the governor, and I went to his Democrat staff for Medicaid. I asked them to prepare an estimate, independent of the estimate that I had done with fiscal research. But I took a step further, Mr. President. I went to the Hospital Association. I asked 3 different independent groups, a partisan Democrat group, a partisan Republican group of experts, and a nonpartisan group of the Hospital Association to develop an impact assessment independent, not talking, not sharing, reporting to me. And what I found is the best case scenario is about a $26 billion cut. Now, we've got a delay, so it may be 2 years, it may be 1 year. All it does is make that $26 billion happen in year 1 or year 12, but the impact is the same, Mr. President, and it's indisputable. Now, when I actually presented this report that you can find on my website, I had people in the administration say, "You're all wet, you don't know what you're doing." I said, well, why don't we assemble a series of meetings? We're going to provide you our analytics. You go through it, tear it apart. And I told about Mehmet Oz, who I consider to be one of the most capable people in the Trump administration. He's a brilliant man, and I encourage my Democrat colleagues to talk to him. He knows his stuff, and he's very focused on getting efficiencies out of CMS. So we had 3 different conference calls with CMS, with Oz on the phone and on the video, and me on the video. And I said this, guys, I would love nothing more than you to prove me wrong. I would love nothing more for you to tell me it's not $26 billion or $30 billion, that it's $2.6 billion, or $2 billion, or $200 million. But after 3 different attempts for them to discredit our estimates, the day before yesterday, they admitted that we were right. That between the state-directed payments and the cuts scheduled in this bill, there's a reduction of state-directed payments, and then there's the reduction of the provider tax. They can't find a hole in my estimate. So what they told me is that, yeah, it's rough, but North Carolina's used the system, they're going to have to make it work. All right, so what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore? When the White House is advising the president are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. And you know the last time I saw a promise broken around health care, with respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, it's when somebody said, if you like your health care, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We found out that wasn't true. That made me the 2nd Republican Speaker of the House since the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, because we betrayed the promise to the American people. 2 years later, 3 years later, it actually made me a U.S. Senator, because in 2010, it had just been proposed. And just anticipation of what was going to happen was enough to have a sea change election that swept Republicans into the majority for the 2nd time in 100 years. Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room when I was there with finance, where he said we can go after waste, fraud, and abuse on any programs. Now, those amateurs that are advising him, not Dr. Oz, I'm talking about White House healthcare experts, refuse to tell him that those instructions that were to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse all of a sudden eliminates a government program that's called the provider tax. We have morphed a legal construct that admittedly has been abused and should be eliminated into waste, fraud, and abuse. Money laundering. Read the code. Look at how long it's been there. I was Speaker of the House. I refused to do it. When I left North Carolina, I said, we're not going to do a provider tax. I left it at 2.5%. Now it's 6%. Mistake on the part of the leadership. And frankly, I know my friends are probably going to think I'm a little bit crazy here, but I actually passed a law that made it illegal to expand Medicaid. Why did I do that? Because I was convinced someday we would be here. And I would have rather found a way to get more people on Medicaid at the standard FMAP than having this 90-10 match and watching it disappear and taking away desperately needed health care. So, Mr. President, over the course of the evening, I may look for an opportunity to speak again. But I'm telling the President that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. I love the work requirement. I love the other reforms in this bill. They are necessary, and I appreciate the leadership of the House for putting it in there. In fact, I like the work of the House so much that I wouldn't be having to do this speech if we simply started with the House mark. I've talked with my colleagues in North Carolina. I know that we can do that, and I believe that we can make sure that we do not break the promise of Donald J. Trump that he's made to the people who are on Medicaid today, Mr. President. But what we're doing, because we've got a view on an artificial deadline on July 4th, that means nothing but another date and time. We could take the time to get this right if we lay down the House mark of the Medicaid bill and fix it. And I know that my friend and colleague from New Hampshire, I jumped in front of her, so I'm only going to take another minute or two. But Mr. President, we owe it to the states to do the work to understand how these proposals affect them. How hard is that? I did it. How hard is it to sit down and ask the Medicaid office, ask the legislative staff, ask the Independent Hospital Association what the impact is? If there's no negative impact, what's wrong with daylight? What's wrong with actually understanding what this bill does? Mr. President, I know what it does because I spent a career implementing complex systems, and then I had the privilege of being Speaker of the House, and I implemented them in a government setting. And since I've been here, I've focused on bills and watched their implementation from the cradle until they're fully implemented. Mr. President, we owe it to the American people, and I owe it to the people of North Carolina to withhold my affirmative vote until it's demonstrated to me that we've done our homework. We're going to make sure that we fulfill the promise, and then I can feel good about a bill that I'm willing to vote for. But until that time, I will be withholding my vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Senator from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that the following appear separately in the record.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations in block, calendar 198 through 249, with the exception of calendar 241, and all nominations on the Secretary's desk with the exception of PM 89. That the nominations be confirmed en bloc, the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. That no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, also asked just for indulgence for one more minute. I ask unanimous consent that this also the following appear separately in the record.
Without objection.
This is really easy, Mr. President. Yesterday was my 38th wedding anniversary. I've convinced Susan Tillis to stay married to me for 38 years. I wish I was going to be with her and a couple of dozen family members down at the beach, but I'm doing my work here and I'm going to stay until it's done. I also want to wish my grandson that they're celebrating his second birthday today down there at that same beach house. God bless my family. I love you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry to see my colleague, Senator Tillis, leave before I have a chance to tell him how much I'm going to miss him. And We have worked together on a number of things, including the Senate NATO Observer Group, and he's been a great partner, an excellent senator, and I'm sorry to hear that he's not going to be staying in this body. But, Mr. President, I'm really here on the floor to oppose the reconciliation bill that we're considering today. It would be the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in a single bill in our history. This legislation would take away health care from millions of Americans. It would cut food aid for millions more. It would raise household energy and health care bills, and it would add trillions to the debt. All to give the top, not just 1%, but the top 0.1% of people who make more than $2.5 million a year, an extra $250,000 a year. At a moment when Americans are struggling with the high cost of living, this bill will take money out of the pockets of working people, the average household making less than $50,000. That's 30% of Americans. So 30% of Americans will lose about $700 a year from this bill. Now, here are some of the ways that it hurts middle-class Americans, the people who I'm very proud to represent in New Hampshire. Somehow the Senate took the bad bill, or what I thought was a bad bill from the House, and they made it much, much worse. This bill is the largest cut to health care in American history. In total, the bill proposes more than $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. $930 billion of that is Medicaid alone, and because of these cuts, more than 300 rural hospitals could close. More than 500 nursing homes could close. These are core programs and services that benefit seniors, children, veterans, people living with disabilities, and working families. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that 17 million Americans, including 43,000 Granite Staters, will lose their health insurance. Now, over the past several weeks, past couple of months, I've toured New Hampshire. I've heard from countless constituents who are deeply anxious about what this bill means for them and for their families. Again and again, they have said plainly, without Medicaid, without the Affordable Care Act, they would not be here today. I heard from Danielle in Dalton, northern New Hampshire. Danielle is a proud mother of 3 sons, 2 of whom have autism. Danielle's sons rely on Medicaid for their health coverage and for their home care. Danielle is not only their full-time caregiver, she receives a stipend from Medicaid to provide for their care. And thanks to Medicaid, both of her sons are able to work part-time. They're able to live at home with their mom, and they're able to remain active in the community. This bill would put all of that at risk. Danielle says her sons could have difficulty qualifying for Medicaid under these new rules. And losing Medicaid would be catastrophic for her family because it would likely force her sons out of work, out of her home, and into a group home or institution. And so it's going to cost a lot more if that happens. Her boys are now contributing members of society, and this bill threatens not only their livelihood and their independence and their future, it threatens their dignity. I heard from Sean in Claremont. Sean shared with me his story of addiction to alcohol, cocaine, and heroin, and his long road to recovery. After several near-death experiences, he found stability in a sober living home and enrolled in Medicaid. With access to treatment, he was able to hold a job and get his life back on track. He eventually opened his own sober living home, Hope to Freedom, where he now helps others suffering from addiction so that they can enroll in Medicaid and begin their own journey to sobriety. I heard from Carla in Exeter. Carla has twin 3-year-old boys, one of whom had serious medical complications at birth. Now, she always was able to have health insurance with her job, but as her family's medical bills piled up, she enrolled her son in Medicaid to ensure that he got the care that her family could not afford and her employee-sponsored health insurance wouldn't pay for. He still needs extensive care to this day, and losing her coverage would put her family into devastating medical debt. Probably the story that I heard that touched me as much as any was from a man in Berlin in northern New Hampshire. He had had a number of substance misuse issues, mental health challenges. He said, without Medicaid, without this center, we were at a center where Medicaid helped pay to support people who needed help. He said, without this, I would just give up. I would commit suicide because there would be nothing for me. These are just a handful of the countless stories I've heard these past few months. They're about real people. This bill isn't just words on a page. It's a direct attack on not only their health and their economic security, but their very dignity, their ability to have fulfilling lives and to contribute back to their communities and to society. We owe them better than this. This bill would also make catastrophic cuts to food assistance that's provided by the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. During this time of high food prices, of increasing food insecurity, it's particularly critical for families to be able to rely on SNAP to help them keep food on the table. One of the ways this bill cuts the program is by requiring states to pay higher costs. Now, as the former governor of New Hampshire, I can tell you how much of a burden this is on our state's budget. And there are all kinds of provisions in this bill that are nothing but massive cost shifts to states. And this is one area. The bill puts food assistance at risk for families with teenage children, as well as older adults, veterans, and individuals experiencing homelessness. In New Hampshire, an estimated 1,000 older adults could lose SNAP access. These cuts will mean increased hunger across the country. You know, we talk a lot about kitchen table issues here. Passing this bill is an explicit vote to take food off of families' kitchen tables. I heard from Rachel. She's a care coordinator at a behavioral health center in Claremont, which is in the western part of New Hampshire. She told me, and I'm quoting here, SNAP is not just a program, it's a lifeline. For the parents I work with, it means being able to send their children to school with full stomachs and functioning minds. For caregivers struggling to make ends meet, it provides some peace of mind knowing there will be something on the table each night. And for children, many of whom are navigating mental health challenges, SNAP supports stability, dignity, and health during formative years. Without SNAP, the strain on these already vulnerable families would increase exponentially. And she goes on to say, finally, SNAP is not a handout. It's a step forward for families working hard to survive and succeed against overwhelming odds. And on the energy front, for families concerned about energy costs, this bill only offers more pain. In addition to cutting off tremendously successful incentives for electricity that are adding reliable, affordable, and clean energy to the grid at a record pace, this bill cuts off long-standing tax credits for consumers, for average everyday Americans to make energy-saving improvements to their homes or to add rooftop solar to take control of their own energy bills. After countless promises to lower people's energy bills, this legislation would do just the opposite. Last year, 2.3 million families took advantage of the home energy efficiency tax credit and cut an average $130 off of their yearly energy bills. Now, that may not sound like a lot to the Mar-a-Lago crowd, but it makes a big difference for families in New Hampshire who worry about how they're going to heat their homes. American households are expected to pay an extra $170 billion in energy bills over the next 10 years thanks to misplaced priorities in this bill. And add to that 1.5 million good jobs that are likely to go away. And it makes you wonder if supporters of this bill have actually read it or if they actually care about American energy dominance. And on taxes, this bill spends more than $4 trillion on tax cuts, including nearly $1 trillion in new tax breaks for the biggest corporations. But for taxpayers earning less than $30,000 a year, they would see an average tax increase. Let me say that again, because I didn't say that quite right with the right emphasis. For taxpayers earning less than $30,000 a year, they would see an average tax increase in 2029. And these are the same families who are going to be harmed most by extreme cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. Families making under $50,000 are likely to be worse off, and some could lose more than $1,500 a year under this bill. So if you add to that the effects of Trump's tariffs, which raised the cost of living for a typical family by $2,000 a year, this makes it even worse for families. So the bottom 80% of households, those making less than $175,000, will be worse off on average under this bill. Now, I've talked about how this bill makes families pay more for health care, for energy and food, in order to give more money to billionaires. But there are a few other things that people should know. First, because of the trillions of dollars this bill would add to the debt, interest rates are likely to go up. That adds more than $1,000 a year for a typical mortgage. This bill makes it harder for students to afford the cost of college, and it removes debt protections for students who have been defrauded by their schools. And this bill actually tries to prohibit states from regulating AI for the next 10 years, making it that much harder to keep our kids safe online and to protect jobs from being lost to the use of this technology. Now, I was first elected to the New Hampshire State Senate more than 30 years ago. This bill that we're considering today would do more harm to more people than any other law I have seen in my entire time in public office. This bill makes having a family more expensive by raising the costs of energy, healthcare, and education. This bill takes food and healthcare away from seniors and families, and it does all of that. It does all of that to give trillions of dollars more to corporations and to the wealthiest. And it explodes our deficit in the process. That's not what the people of New Hampshire are asking for, and it's not what Americans deserve. And so to my colleagues in the Senate, I say this. At a moment when Americans are feeling squeezed by the cost of living, we should be doing something about that. Instead of gutting health care to pay for tax cuts, we should be expanding access to affordable quality care. Instead of turning our backs on working parents, we should be making housing more affordable, and we should ensure that every child has access to high-quality, affordable early education. Instead of cutting nutrition programs, let's make sure that no child in America goes hungry. Instead of driving up food and energy prices, let's invest in the programs that help American families succeed. President Trump calls this the big, beautiful bill. But it is a big betrayal of the American people. There's nothing beautiful about taking away health care and food from working families to give more money to billionaires. So I intend to vote against this legislation, and I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senate Bill Illinois.
Mr. President, I don't believe you can serve in the United States Senate without being at least an amateur student of history. You're overwhelmed in this chamber, which is where the Senate has met since 1859, to reflect on all of the things that have occurred in the past, and you remember your own experience there as well. I certainly do. This is my 29th year of service in the Senate, and I think back this evening of some of the things which I've witnessed and still stick with me. I can still see that door open and Ted Kennedy walk through it, summoned from his deathbed in Massachusetts to cast a deciding vote on the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. He wouldn't miss it, even if it meant he was going to die in the process. I think of that door over there when President Trump in his first term tried to basically eliminate the Affordable Care Act. And it was saved at the last minute at 2 o'clock in the morning when John McCain came through those doors, stood in the well right by that table to the Republican side, and cast his vote no. Couldn't raise his arm, had been damaged so badly when he served as a prisoner of war during Vietnam that you knew how decisive his gesture was, and he saved health care for millions of Americans. There were other moments as well that I can reflect on. The point I'd like to get to is this. There was a speech a few minutes ago on the floor of the United States Senate which every senator should have heard, particularly every Republican senator. Senator from North Carolina gave a speech. Senator Tillis had explained why he had decided to vote against this Republican budget plan, this reconciliation bill. He explained it in a thoughtful and comprehensive and convincing way. But before he made his decision, he turned to Republicans in the state and Democrats and a neutral third party to analyze the bill. And he concluded, Mr. President, after that study, that careful study, that this measure, this changes in Medicaid and Medicare and other health programs would be a disaster for the state of North Carolina. He'd made it clear before tonight that he was going to vote against this bill, and he made it clear this morning that he's preparing to retire from the Senate. I felt his statement was compelling, and I'm sorry that there weren't other members on the Republican side, at least one, beyond the presiding officer present to hear it. It's seldom that you hear a speech on the floor of the Senate that you know is so personal and so heartfelt and so meaningful as the statement made by Senator Tillis earlier. He had made a decision which will be widely reported, I'm sure, and showed a level of political courage which you seldom see in this chamber. He basically said, in a positive way, the president was wrong in believing that this wouldn't hurt ordinary people. This Republican measure, which is before us tonight, tomorrow, is going to hurt a lot of people. We estimate that 16 million American families will lose their health insurance as a result of this measure that's on the floor today. I've said it before, but I want to repeat it. If you have ever been the father of a new baby with a serious medical problem and you have no health insurance, you'll never forget that moment as long as you live. I know, I've been there. I went to the charity ward of Children's Hospital here as a student at Georgetown Law School with my wife and baby. And we waited in line to see which doctor would walk through the door and see my baby and save her life. You feel that you let everybody down in the world at that point, that you don't have health insurance when you need it so badly. It means so much to you. This bill is designed to take health insurance away from 11 million families in America. 11 million families in America in a period of time will not have peace of mind that they have access to the best care because they will lost their health insurance. What is it about Donald Trump taking away coverage of health care? Why has this become the trademark of the Donald Trump Republican Party? He did it in his first term, or tried to, and John McCain stopped him. And now he's trying to do it again. The question is whether Senator Tillis and his Republican colleagues can muster enough courage to step up and find 4 Republican senators who will say, no, I'm not going there. I don't want it on my conscience or my record that I took health insurance away from so many American people. Now, you may argue, Durbin, you're a Democrat, and I am. And your arguments have to be tempered because you're so partisan, so political. Surely it isn't as bad as you just said it was. Well, let me read something to you. It's from a group called the American Cancer Society. I'm sure you've heard of it. This is their Cancer Action Network, and it's a letter to the Senate from Lisa Lacasse, president of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. And here's what she says about the measure that's pending before us now, that we're being asked to vote on. From the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, quote, history will be made with this vote. Congress has one last chance to stop this unprecedented attack on access to health care for millions of Americans, including cancer patients and survivors. Congress can say no to terminating health coverage for nearly 11 million people who will have no other affordable option available to them if this bill passes. Currently, 1 in 10 people with a history of cancer have Medicaid coverage, including 1 in 3 kids who are newly diagnosed with cancer. We know having quality health coverage is one of the most significant factors in whether someone survives a cancer diagnosis. Voting for this bill means voting to rip the chance of survival away from real people. She goes on to say, simply put, this bill will mean more Americans are living sicker and dying sooner. And then she said, lives are on the line. So if you're skeptical about anything that I say because of my partisan background, I understand it. But for goodness sakes, from the American Cancer Society, to have such a definitive statement made that this measure that we're being asked to vote on is going to harm innocent people, men, women, and children. That's a fact. And Mr. President, I might add another short message that we received from the Children's Hospital Association. The Children's Hospital Association. Matthew Cook is their president and CEO. And here's what he says about this bill that is pending. The new version of the budget reconciliation bill is a crisis for children's health care, hospitals, and providers nationwide. And we ask Congress to oppose it as an act of support for American children. This bill goes much too far. The bill allows to fewer doctors and nurses to see your child, longer wait times, and sicker children. We know that the impacts of poor pediatric health care reverberate for a lifetime. From the Children's Hospital Association. Neither of these organizations are partisan organizations, and they have confirmed what Senator Tillis said earlier on behalf of the state of North Carolina and what those of us on this side of the aisle are saying all along. Why would we risk the lives and well-being of so many children, so many American families? What isn't about the $1 trillion which we will take out of the healthcare system in America that is so pressing, so demanding that we're willing to make these big risks? I'll tell you what it is. It is an extension of tax breaks. Tax breaks for the wealthiest people. Oh, Durbin, you Democrats always talk about billionaires and millionaires. That can't be true. Senator Angus King is here. He told me that he did an analysis of the actual tax breaks. And if I remember correctly, if you do a cutoff of income of $400,000 a year and send anyone over that figure is not going to receive any tax break, it would reduce the cost of this tax program by 60% or more. 60% or more. So when we talk about tax breaks for the wealthiest people in America, that's exactly what this is about. I want to give tax breaks, if I can, to working families who struggle from paycheck to paycheck. But for goodness sakes, a $346,000 tax cut for Elon Musk, the richest man on earth? What are we thinking? And I just want to make a quick reference to 2 states that have an experience coming with this bill, which will be dramatic. One is Kansas. In Kansas, 360,000 individuals rely on Medicaid coverage. 56% of them are children. But with this bill, 89,000 people in Kansas are going to lose their health insurance. In Kansas, Medicaid covers 1/3 of births, 58% of nursing home residents. What happens when Medicaid does not pay for enough money into the nursing home to keep your mother in the good care, or your father, or someone in your family? What do you do next? Well, you exhaust the savings that are available to your family. And if that isn't enough, what's next? I don't know, but when I grew up as a kid, there was a spare bedroom at my grandparents' home for brothers and sisters who had no place else to go. I suppose that's going to happen to some families. Already 28 rural hospitals in Kansas are at immediate risk of closure. To think that this measure would have no impact on those families and those communities is just plain wrong. In the adjoining state of Missouri, which I grew up across the river in Mississippi River, grew up in Illinois, I grew up across the river from St. Louis, Missouri, 1.2 million individuals rely on Medicaid coverage, 50% of children. With this bill, 250,000 people in Missouri are projected to lose their health insurance. Medicaid covers 40% of births in Missouri, 65% of nursing homes. Already 10 rural hospitals in Missouri are at immediate risk of closure. Mr. President, you know as well as I do what happens in small town America, rural America, when they close the hospital. It is devastating, not just because you don't have access to quality health care, because you just lost a major economic engine for that community. Try to attract a new business to that town after the hospital closes, and watch what you run into. It is that devastating. And that is the reality of this approach. And why are we doing it? What is the national emergency that calls on us to make this change? Tax breaks for the wealthiest people in America. That is what's motivating the Republicans now. I want to close in just saying thank you to Senator Tillis. He's shown extraordinary courage. The question is whether others will join him. Whether 4 Republican senators will step up and say enough. I've heard enough, I've seen enough, I believe this is wrong. There are ways we can help people who need a tax break rather than the wealthiest people that won't damage so many families. 11 million, 16 million, whatever the number turns out to be, who lose health insurance. I hope that we come to our senses and do it soon. I hope that what Senator Tillis said on the floor will inspire members of his own caucus to listen carefully, to know that he speaks the truth, and he has taken great political risk to say it. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wisconsin.
Thank you. I am proud to join my Midwestern colleagues today to draw attention to what is happening in our states if this bill were to come to pass. And so I rise today on behalf of the 17 million Americans who are poised to have their health care terminated because of the Republicans' disastrous budget bill. And while I'm laser focused on the nearly 260,000 Wisconsinites whose health care will be placed in jeopardy by this measure, I realize that so many Americans who reside in states that are represented by Republicans don't have a voice in this fight right now on this Senate floor. You know, I have traveled my state extensively listening to people talk about how this bill would impact them and their families. And I've shared those stories. I've uplifted those stories, sometimes right here on the Senate floor, and sometimes in other ways. But I know that my Republican colleagues are getting the same influx of phone calls and letters that I'm getting from parents of children with disabilities, from the elderly, and folks who are working hard but just can't keep up. These are constituents who are downright scared that they will have a rug pulled out from under them. And I know my Republicans are hearing from their rural hospitals and their pediatricians who are clear about what this bill will mean for their ability to keep their doors open and to care for their patients. According to reports, my colleague from Kentucky even admitted as much behind closed doors last week, saying that, I know a lot of us are hearing from people back home about Medicaid, but rather than committing to join us in this fight, he said, they'll get over it, and urged his colleagues to forge ahead with this bill. Well, if my Republican colleagues won't fight for these Americans, I think it's well past time that some of us do. And that is why I'm proud to be standing with my Midwestern Democratic colleagues to do and say something about it. I'm here to stand up for the over 500,000 Midwestern Americans in Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, the Dakotas, whose health care is on the chopping block if Republicans jam through this terrible budget bill. In just those 6 states alone, over 340,000 Americans will lose their Affordable Care Act coverage, and over 225,000 Americans will be kicked off Medicaid if the Republicans get their bill and their way. In Iowa, over 100,000 Americans' care could be on the chopping block, including over 58,000 Americans whose families rely on Medicaid. When we talk about hundreds of thousands of people losing health care coverage, it can sometimes get lost that this actually means people, not numbers. The numbers we're talking about are people. They have faces, they have stories, they have families, and they matter. Take Patrick Kearns, a registered nurse in Iowa City at the VA Medical Center and father of 2 adult children with disabilities. He told the Des Moines Register, "My children are not scamming a system. The idea that they're somehow gaming the system at the detriment to the rest of society, especially when people like Elon Musk are using words like parasite to describe my children, anger doesn't quite encompass how I feel," he continued. "I just find it shocking that you would go after truly the most vulnerable people as if they are somehow conducting fraud. These folks are barely surviving." In Kansas, where nearly 90,000 Americans' health coverage is at risk, including 18,000 Kansans on Medicaid, Kathy and Jacob shared the story of their adopted sister, Maria, who suffered a traumatic brain injury at just 7 weeks old. Because of Medicaid, the family could afford at-home nursing services before their sister passed away in 2024. Jacob told the Kansas Reflector, "This is not right or left. This is truly a human right. Yes, we want to get rid of fraud. People using the support that's not fraud, that's called helping people live the best life in the most respectful and dignified way possible." In Missouri, 250,000 Americans' care is on the chopping block, including over 100,000 with Medicaid. In the suburb of St. Louis, Sandra told the Kaiser Family Foundation Health News that she worries about her 24-year-old daughter, Sarah, and the 24-hour care she needs, including in-home nursing. Sandra said, "I really and truly don't know what I would do if we lost the Medicaid home care. I have no plan whatsoever. It is not sustainable for anyone to do infinite 24-hour care without dire physical health, mental health, and financial consequences, especially as we parents get into our elder years." In Nebraska, 74,000 people could lose coverage, including 26,000 Americans on Medicaid. Dr. Ann Anderson Berry, who works at the Children's Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, told Nebraska Public Media that these cuts would greatly harm those in Nebraska's rural communities. According to Dr. Anderson Berry, this is not just a healthcare issue. It's a workforce issue, an education issue, and economic issues. Communities without access to safe childbirth cannot attract or retain young families. They struggle to grow and they suffer generational consequences. Nebraska simply deserves better. Our rural families deserve better. Cutting Medicaid may save money on a spreadsheet, but it will cost lives in real communities and put the expensive burden of care back on our communities. In South Dakota, 31,000 Americans' insurance is at risk under this bill, including 12,000 Americans on Medicaid. Retired family physician Tom Dean from Wessington Springs shared his concerns about what the cuts to Medicaid will mean for nursing homes and the health of moms and babies. He told the South Dakota Searchlight, "I'm really frightened about the impact it will have on nursing homes. Medicaid is a major payer for prenatal, delivery, and postpartum care, and that's a major concern, especially in rural areas." I know that my Republican colleagues are hearing these stories from their constituents, and we need to make sure that they can't ignore them. These stories and the people behind them make all the difference in this fight to protect Medicaid. I'm proud to give them a voice in the Senate as my Republican colleagues continue their crusade to rip away health care from 17 million Americans. The American people don't like this bill, and that includes Americans who live in red, blue, and purple states. We're going to keep ringing the alarm bells on behalf of Americans in every corner, every part of this nation, and protect the critical coverage working families need and deserve. Lives depend upon it. I yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise today along with my colleagues from Illinois and from Wisconsin, and you just heard from Senator Baldwin about the effect of this budget bill on the Midwest. I guess I'd start by asking the same questions that our colleague, Senator Tillis, who just announced he wasn't going to seek re-election after the president threatened him with a primary, and after he took a vote and had the audacity to ask the questions that had to be asked about this bill. And you heard him today. He talked about how he had talked to the hospital association in his state, how he had talked to the governor's office, how he had gotten the actual data on the effects of Medicaid in North Carolina. And then he asked the questions, how hard is it to see the impact of these proposals? And he asked, what's wrong with putting a little daylight on what's going on here? So that's what I'm going to do in my few minutes here. Put a little Midwestern daylight on what's going on here. That is that under this bill, 17 million people would be kicked off their health care because of the Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act changes. That was 16 million people until we got the updated numbers from the Congressional Budget Office. That's a nonpartisan group. It also drives $4 trillion in debt. It used to be 3.4, now it's up to $4 trillion. And what will that mean? That will mean big time in the Midwest, where I have so many of my own constituents wanting to buy their first house. Going to mean major increased interest rates. It's going to mean difficulty in buying all kinds of things for which you would take out loans, or for small businesses. All for giving a bunch of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. $400,000 for multi-millionaires. Our colleagues are going to raise costs and take health care and food away from millions of Americans. So my colleagues have talked about, Senator Baldwin and Senator Durbin, talked about the effect that this bill has in the Midwest when it comes to health care, the closing of the rural hospitals. The Midwest has a huge number of these rural hospitals, about half of them that be forecast to close. She talked about the Medicaid. So I'm going to talk about a different piece of this, and this is the impact of cuts to food assistance. There is no avoiding the facts. Here they are. About a month ago, the House passed a budget bill, as you know, that cut nutrition assistance by nearly $300 billion. It put the country on track to eliminate SNAP for 4 million Americans and reduce benefits for millions more. I was hopeful that we would go in another direction. And while there were some changes made by the Republicans on the Agriculture Committee that I appreciated, it still amounts to over $185 billion in cuts from the SNAP program. And let me remind you that the vast majority of people on SNAP are older Americans, people with kids, veterans, people with disabilities. We were just out on the Senate steps with a number of those people and the groups that they represent and faith leaders talking about this very subject. Why them? Why give tax cuts to the wealthy on their backs? We know that the impact of the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill will be even more stark in the Midwest. In the Midwest, here are some examples. Americans use SNAP benefits. Nearly 155,000 people in Nebraska. And let's face it, that is not the biggest population state, but 155,000 Nebraskans use SNAP. About 190,000 people in Kansas, 260,000 people in Iowa, 660,000 people in Missouri, 700,000 people in the state of Wisconsin. Senator Baldwin just talked about the impact of health care there, but 700,000 people in my neighbors in Wisconsin. Nearly 1.5 million people in Michigan use SNAP. And in Minnesota, 450,000. So yes, those people will be affected greatly by this slow shift to the state. And unfortunately, while we tried to fight part of this, the state shift, we were not able to get that changed in the last few days. This means certain states, I'm just going to give you some examples, hundreds of millions of dollars are supposed to shift over to states in the Midwest, when 41 of the 50 states in our country have balanced budget amendments. So what are they supposed to do? Cut infrastructure, cut law enforcement, when the majority of these cuts, and this is why this is such funny math, are shifts to the states. And it's why governors, especially in the Midwest, Governor Kelly in the state of Kansas has been speaking out big time on this, why they are so concerned about these shifts. In addition, and this is not something everyone thinks about when they think about SNAP, but we think about it big time in the Midwest, farmers and grocers. Over a third of America's farmland is located in the Midwest. That includes more than 722,000 farm operations, which is more than 1/3 of farms nationwide. So why would farmers care about this? Well, they will lose revenue because Americans won't be able to buy their products. And that loss, that's the SNAP program, right? It buys food from America, just like international organizations were buying food from America with USAID. That's been cut. Or the Trump tariffs, which dry up markets in places all over the world because of retaliatory tariffs. That's hitting our farmers. Input costs, inflation, you name it. And now this on top of it. In addition, this is going to be a big hit to our grocers. In many rural counties throughout the Midwest, their independent grocery store is the lone grocer in the country, and just in the county. So in 76 counties nationwide, they don't even have a single grocery store. And half of those are in the Midwest. I recently visited an employee-owned grocery store in rural Long Prairie, Minnesota. Population, 3,600. Businesses like that operate on tight margins, and they usually serve not just that county, as you could see from the numbers I just provided you, but with the surrounding counties, or they may be the only one in town. Businesses like that, the cuts to SNAP, it's pretty significant because that's sometimes the margin on which they're able to stay alive as a business. This would make it harder and harder and more expensive for those grocery stores. It could put them out of business, that's for sure. That's what the grocery stores believe. But it also hurts the individual people in their areas, because in the rural areas, you have an overwhelming number of seniors, you've got an overwhelming number of veterans, and you have just an overwhelming number of the people who are using these kinds of grocery stores. So SNAP supports hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in wages at these independent grocers, farms, other industries, including more than 1,700 jobs in Nebraska, more than 1,900 jobs in Kansas, more than 2,600 jobs in Iowa, more than 7,000 jobs in Missouri, more than 600,000 jobs in Wisconsin, more than 13,000 jobs in Michigan, more than 4,000 jobs in Minnesota. We know that from farmers and truckers to local grocers, for every dollar invested in SNAP, about $1.50 of economic activity is generated nationwide. For many Midwesterners, this bill would make the difference between having a grocery store in their region or not. I mentioned the shift of billions of dollars of cost to states that will blow holes through the state budget. They won't be able to afford it. And sadly, our Republican colleagues know this because 44 states have this balanced budget rule. And they're going to be forced to choose between paying the cost for food and paying for critical services. That is why 23 Democratic governors, full of them, just laid out in a letter to Congress. These cuts don't just increase state costs, they make it nearly impossible for states to effectively plan for these long-term budget impacts. Those are governors from Kentucky, with Governor Beshear, to Arizona, with Governor Hobbs. Across the entire nation, we heard from these governors. Not to mention the governors such as Governor Pritzker in Illinois and Governor Walz in Minnesota and Governor Kelly in Kansas and Governor Whitmer in Michigan. Based on 2023 figures, ready for this? The House and Senate version of this bill would shift, and it varies because the bills are different. This is how much money we're talking to. Between $16 million and $49 million onto the state of Nebraska. Between $61 million and $101 million in costs onto Kansas. Imagine the budget. There's suddenly, oh, you got to do an extra $60 million. Too bad you have a balanced budget amendment. Up to $26 million in costs onto Iowa. Between $225 million and $376 million onto the state budget in Missouri, up to $68 million in costs onto Wisconsin, where Governor Evers was also a signator of this letter, between $456 and $761 million in costs onto Michigan, and between $43 million and $128 million in costs onto Minnesota. And those numbers on top of an increased administrative cost shift to states. It used to be 50-50, now it's 75-25. Hello, states, you with strapped budgets, we're now making you pay 75% of administrative costs, which would make it even harder for states to invest in the staff training and upgraded financial systems that would make the program more sound and reduce payment errors. It's not just the state budgets that will be affected. In many states, including Minnesota and Wisconsin, it is counties rather than the states that run the SNAP program. So I had a visit from some of the rural counties, and they talk about living off a margin, a thin margin, trying to help their taxpayers, trying to get this done. In states like Minnesota and Wisconsin that believe in strong local government, big surprise, our states and a number of other sort of states with bigger rural areas have decided we'd rather have the counties do this. So now these cost shifts will go directly to these county governments, and you would not believe the numbers on what they would have to do to increase their taxes in these rural counties. They said, we can't do that. So if that happens, they will have to raise their local property taxes or cut county services. In the past, we have said that if you're raising kids or taking care of an older relative, we're going to help you feed your family, even if you don't have a job. This reconciliation bill would change that. It would withhold food assistance from families raising kids over the age of 13 and adults 55 and up if they don't meet the new requirements. The Senate bill also eliminates an existing exemption for veterans, homeless people, and former foster youth, an exemption my Republican colleagues supported in the Fiscal Responsibility Act just 2 years ago. So this is a shift among the party. The Republican Party actually said this was a good idea to have exemptions for vets and homeless people and former foster youth. Not anymore. These are people who are already struggling, veterans who have sacrificed to serve our country. I believe that when our veterans signed up to serve, there wasn't a waiting line. United States of America. So everyone that I've talked to about this, just as Senator Tillis was saying about Medicaid in North Carolina, and I've spent time on this, I visit all 87 counties in my state every year. I'm up to 49. So I've been able to talk to people who aren't political, who are Republicans, talk to people I just run into in rural grocery stores, in the vegetable line. I mean, I have talked to a ton of people. And what they have said to the store managers, to the food shelf volunteers, to those that take SNAP, this isn't a good idea. That's what the public opinion polls say. Fox News poll, 60% of people say this bill is a bad idea. 2 to 1 say it's going to help wealthy people and not them. Well, they're right about that. This is a betrayal of the middle class, and it only takes 4 of our colleagues, and 4 in the House, by the way, to stand up and say, we need to rewrite this thing. Let's start over. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, I rise today to express my strong opposition to the devastating and dangerous tax and spending bill that Senate Republicans are trying to jam through this weekend on a party line vote. A bill that will gut essential programs like Medicaid and SNAP just to pay for even more tax breaks for billionaires. So let's be clear about what's happening here. This big, beautiful betrayal, it isn't about fiscal discipline, it's fiscally reckless. It isn't about responsibility or doing what's best for average Americans. It's about misguided priorities. It's about giving more to the ultra-wealthy on the backs of hard-working families. This bill will take away health care and food assistance from people and families who need it most, just so D.C. Republicans can pay more for tax cuts for those who need them the least. D.C. Republicans want to have more tax cuts for those who need them the least. Once again, Republicans in Congress are putting the interests of the ultra-wealthy above the needs of hard-working families, children with disabilities, seniors, and Americans who rely on Medicaid each and every day. Earlier this year, I held a roundtable in Las Vegas with Nevada families who rely on Medicaid. For them, Medicaid is not just a talking point. They're not simply paid for as in a budget bill. Medicaid is a lifeline. It literally keeps their children alive. We talk to people like Jessica, his daughter Kay, she's 4 years old. She was born with Down syndrome and was recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Jessica relies on Medicaid to help cover the cost of weekly physical, speech, and occupational therapies for Kay, all of which are responsible, well, they're helping her learn to walk, to use utensils, to write her own name. Imagine when her mother sees her write her own name. It's a proud moment. Kay also has a cardiologist and an endocrinologist to manage conditions related to her Down syndrome. Medicaid covers these doctors. It covers her insulin. It covers the insulin pump that allows Jessica to manage her daughter's diabetes around the clock. Well, because Kay can't communicate when her blood sugar is dangerously low or high. And Jessica said something at that round table I'll never forget. And I quote, can't imagine losing Medicaid. Obviously, I'm going to have to try to give up something because I'm not going to let her go without insulin and the life-saving care she needs. And I can't even imagine to think about what I'd have to cut or what I'd have to do in order to pay for the life-saving care that she needs and deserves. Christy, another Nevada mom, was also at that round table. Her daughter Sadie's 13. She's been bravely battling an aggressive form of leukemia for the past 2 years. Since her diagnosis, Sadie has spent more than a year and a half in and out of the hospital undergoing treatment for her cancer, all covered, thankfully, by Medicaid. Sadie's father, well, he passed away during the COVID pandemic, sadly. And Christy became Sadie's sole caregiver and sole provider. Medicaid, it's critical, and simply put, it is life-saving. So why are Republicans looking to cut it? So billionaires can get another tax break? So that Republican lawmakers can hand out trillions of dollars in tax giveaways to the wealthiest 1%, while thousands of people lose access to life-saving care? The cuts proposed to Medicaid, they're going to affect veterans and Nevadans with cancer who can't work. It'll be kicked off their health insurance, the insurance that they need to stay alive. It'll kick the family caregiver who takes care of both her aging parents, maybe off her own coverage. The majority of adults on Medicaid already work, and Republicans are counting on savings from these hardworking Americans losing coverage too because of paperwork. Paperwork is just going to be so bureaucratic, so full of red tape. The goal is to make it so hard, so damn burdensome that nobody can do it. No one can go to work, take care of their sick loved one, be sick themselves. They're hoping they drop off, even if they technically qualify. This is where they find their savings. Are we supposed to cut red tape and improve the lives of our constituents? And so this is just cruel. It's a lose-lose situation. People can't work because they have a life-threatening illness, or they're working and they miss the complicated new paperwork. Or people are hoping that they can't do, so they'll drop off, and that's where they'll find the savings. They'll lose their health insurance, and maybe they'll drop off and they'll lose their life too. All for a tax break for the wealthiest, or the billionaire cabinet of our current president. Mr. President, this is just shameful. This bill would also slash SNAP. As my colleagues before me have told you some of the statistics. SNAP, the nutrition program that helps nearly 1 in 6 Nevadans put food on the table. Most of these recipients are children. When they cut this program, you tell me what our families supposed to do. You tell me what families are supposed to do when they cut food assistance. How are they going to put food on the table? What will they say to their hungry children? Sorry, kids, you have to go hungry so billionaires can get a tax break? This just can't be right. This just can't be right. And it doesn't stop there. This bill threatens thousands of good-paying union jobs in Nevada across our country by letting critical tax credits for solar, for wind projects expire before those projects can even get off the ground. You know, in Nevada, we have more solar jobs per capita, more than any other state in the nation. And we have enough solar energy to power nearly 1.3 million homes. It's a growing, terrific industry in Nevada. We need all the energy we can get at an affordable price. And this bill is going to decimate this important and growing industry, not just in my state, but in states across this country. And on top of that, Republicans have added an additional new tax on wind and solar projects. It just won't kill the industry. Like I said, it's going to raise prices on hard-working families families who are already paying too much for their energy. I thought we're supposed to be lowering prices, creating opportunity, expanding, and investing in our infrastructure and in our nation. But this bill is going to add more taxes, slash products, and raise energy prices for hardworking families. And all of this is causing companies across the country to stall or cancel projects over the uncertainty of losing access to the tax credits. This means fewer jobs, less investment, and just more families wondering actually how they're going to make ends meet. We're talking about an industry that supports nearly 280,000 American workers, electricians, technicians, construction crews. I could go on and on about all the jobs that are in our solar and wind industry. And we're pulling the rug right out from under them, and killing thousands, hundreds of thousands of clean energy jobs. Again, I'm going to remind you, all of this for one purpose and one purpose alone, to give tax breaks to billionaires. So anyone who supports this bill is not pro-worker. They're not looking out for underdogs, for hardworking families. They're just focused on making the rich, well, richer. And I'm not going to stand by and letting families lose access to their health care, to their food assistance, to their jobs. Also, billionaires can pad their pockets. And I want to remind people what we did when we used the reconciliation process. We expanded health insurance subsidies, and for the first time, we gave Medicare the authority to negotiate for lower drug prices for our seniors. We invested in our clean energy future. We cut costs for families instead of cutting lifelines. And this D.C. Republican bill is extreme. It's cruel, and it's not what the American people want. People want lower costs. People want economic security. Parents want their kids to have care when they're sick and a fair shot to thrive. They don't want their future sold off to billionaires. So I say to my Republican colleagues, please don't turn your backs. Please don't turn your backs on families who need you, who need this the most. I want you to come look at my Nevada moms and my Nevada dads in the eyes and tell them they don't matter, that their children don't matter, that their lives of their kids don't matter because they won't get the care they need. And I shudder to think of the consequences. Please come to Nevada, sit with these parents and tell them that they don't matter. I don't know how you could face them and gut Medicaid to give billionaires a tax cut, but that's what you're about to do. And the American people deserve better. And I will fight every single step of the way to make sure that they get it. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Senator from North Carolina.
Hey, Mr. President, I'm going to be brief. I promised Senator Hollins, Senator. It's going to be about 5 minutes. This is an easy one. Number one, I should have probably said this earlier. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I completely disagree with the narrative of the billionaire taxes. Folks, this is actually reducing or making sure that we don't raise taxes on people like me that grew up in trailer parks, didn't get my degree till I was 37, struggled to make ends meet. Those people benefit from that. I've read the bill. I think most of you know I'm detail-oriented. It's not what it seems. So I also should thank Senator Crapo. He's a good friend, great leader. I should have thanked him for the hard work that he's doing. I got a little bit focused on the Medicaid failed baseline that's in the bill, but I should have started with that. So thanks to Mike Crapo and to Senator Thune, who I admire as our leader. Mr. President, I'm here to talk about the production tax credit and the investment tax credit, though. It's another classic example where think tanks and people that haven't worked a day in business are setting policy in the White House without a clue about what they're potentially doing to our grid. A lot of people I had Alex Weinstein, who is a self-described philosopher and expert in this area in my office.
talking with 3 people, practitioners that actually work in it. One of them is someone who specializes in power purchase agreements for large businesses. Walmart's one of the most sophisticated buyers of electrons in the world. They map out their power requirements years in advance. They want to make sure that their food doesn't spoil and they got power running. They've already made several power purchase agreements with projects underway, folks. And this bill is basically gutting it. And everybody's high-fiving. What's amazing to me, Mr. President, is the mark that we laid down the other day almost achieved the same level of cuts of the House bill within $30 billion. Within $30 billion. And instead of thinking that was progress, somebody got cute and decided to take away in construction and put it in service. Let me tell you why this is disingenuous. I was a partner at Price Waterhouse, worked in the utilities practice, large utilities like TECO, Duke, Florida Progress, AEP. I know this industry. I understand base load. I understand peaking, and I understand this technology, which is increasingly becoming viable because of storage as a part of augmenting base load. Well, now we've got the Walmarts and all of these data centers and everything that we want to bring back on shore, putting in these power purchase agreements teed to these projects like solar in particular, like wind and other innovative, the renewable natural gas, methane, hydrogen. I can go on. But somebody, a self-described philosopher in a think tank that I admire a lot, but I realize if you're a philosopher and you're in a think tank, you by definition have never worked in an operational role. So you can't possibly understand what happens to this pipeline of power purchase agreements and the future of our grid. So here's what's going to happen. Wipe it clean. Put an excise tax in. Effectively throw the football into the end zone, spin it, walk away, and do the party dance. And what you have done is create a blip in power service because there isn't going to be a gas-fired generator anytime soon. Folks, the generators necessary to create power with gas, best case 5 years from now. That's best case. 5 years from now. So you can't get that online at the same time this whole pipeline is going down. So I want that philosopher to tell me that he understands how to plan out power over time. And to let me know that when all these projects fail, some will make it, some will get subsidized, some will go bankrupt, so it won't be Armageddon, but it's going to be a problem. So they better get it right. It's another example, folks, when you rush a bill and you don't think through the implementation, you don't get it right. And so I hope that my colleagues recognize it's half-baked. It's another reason why we should go back to the House, Mark, get Medicaid right, so I can come on the floor and tell my colleagues on the other side of the aisle why they're wrong on all the attributes of the House part, why they are wrong on some of their characterizations of the tax bill, and why they will be wrong on an energy policy that makes sense. But I have to vote against the bill from my own party that I have never parted from before because we're rushing to an arbitrary deadline with people who have never worked a day in this industry, maybe philosophized and written a few white papers on it, but haven't gotten their hands dirty. I have, and this is another segment of the bill that needs to change. Thank you, Mr. President.
Listen, the senator from Maryland. Mr. President, Donald Trump likes to call the bill that Republicans are trying to rush through this Senate the big, beautiful bill. Well, it's big, all right. It took the Senate clerk nearly 16 hours to speed read through it. But it is only beautiful if you're a billionaire or otherwise very wealthy in America.